So, let's set the scene. It's 20,000 BC, and the world is a frozen hellscape. Think Antarctica, but without the cute penguins or the occasional research station serving instant coffee. The Ice Age is in full swing, and the landscape is a glittering, soul-crushing expanse of snow and ice that stretches farther than your average caveman could throw a spear. Which, let's be honest, wasn't very far, because these guys weren't exactly Olympic javelin champs. The wind cuts through the air like a flint knife through a woolly mammoth's hide, and the temperature? Oh, it's so cold that even the sun seems to be second-guessing its decision to rise each morning. You're a caveman, or cavewoman, let's not discriminate in this frozen nightmare, and your daily to-do list is brutally simple. Don't die. That's it. Don't freeze. Don't starve. Don't get eaten by a saber-toothed cat who's having a bad day. And somehow, amidst this chaos, you're supposed to get a good night's sleep. Yeah, right. Let's talk about the caveman's bedroom, shall we? No memory foam mattresses here, no 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets, not even a sad little IKEA throw pillow. Your bed is a corner of the cave where the floor is slightly less rocky than the rest. If you're lucky, you've scraped together a pile of leaves, twigs, and maybe some animal hides that still smell faintly of their previous owner. And when I say lucky, I mean you spent half the day wrestling with thorns and dodging angry badgers just to gather this pathetic excuse for bedding. The cave itself? It's not exactly a 5-star Airbnb. The walls are damp, the air smells like a mix of mold and despair, and there's a constant drip 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 from some stalactite that's been mocking you for weeks. Cozy? Sure, if your definition of cozy is slightly less likely to kill you than sleeping outside. But here's the kicker. These cavemen didn't just survive these winters. They thrived, at least enough to keep the human race stumbling forward. And sleep? Oh, they slept. They slept so well that if you dropped a modern insomniac into their cave, they'd be begging for the secret sauce. So, what was their deal? How did they turn a frozen cave into the equivalent of a prehistoric Four Seasons? Well, let's start with the first trick in their playbook. Location, location, location. Cavemen weren't just randomly stumbling into any old cave like it was a prehistoric open house. No, they were picky. They wanted a cave with good bones, pun absolutely intended. A south-facing entrance was prime real estate because it caught whatever pathetic rays of sunlight managed to pierce the Ice Age gloom. Sunlight meant warmth, and warmth meant you might wake up with all 10 fingers still attached. Finding the right cave was no small feat, though. Imagine your grog, or whatever grunt-worthy name you've got, and you're trudging through knee-deep snow, your beard frozen solid, looking for the perfect cave. You're not just checking for square footage or a nice view of the glacier. You're sniffing out predators because nothing ruins a nap like a cave bear deciding your cave is now his cave. You're also checking for airflow, too much wind and you're sleeping in a wind tunnel, too little and you're choking on the smoke from your sad little fire. Oh, and that fire? It's your lifeline, but it's also a diva. Too close and you're roasting like a mammoth kebab. Too far and you're just blowing smoke rings while your toes turn black. Grog and his clan had to play Goldilocks with every single cave, and they didn't have the luxury of a Yelp review to guide them. Once they found their cave, the real work began. Insulation was the name of the game, and cavemen were the original DIY kings. They didn't have Home Depot, but they had determination and a lot of dead animals. Animal hides were the caveman's version of a weighted blanket, except instead of calming anxiety, they were keeping you from becoming a human popsicle. These weren't just any hides, mind you. We're talking woolly mammoth, reindeer, maybe a bison if you were feeling fancy. Skinning these beasts was a nightmare. Imagine trying to peel an orange with a dull rock while the orange is still trying to gore you. But once you had those hides, you were golden. Layer them on the ground, pile them on top of yourself, and suddenly your cave is less frozen tomb and more slightly less frozen tomb. But hides alone weren't enough. Cavemen got creative. They'd stuff leaves, grass, and even feathers into cracks in the cave walls to block drafts. Think of it as the Stone Age equivalent of weather stripping, except instead of foam tape, you're using whatever you could yank off a bush without losing a finger to frostbite. And let's not forget the fire. Fire was the caveman's best friend, lover, and therapist all rolled into one. Keeping it going was a full-time job. You had to scavenge wood in a world where every tree looked like it was auditioning for a role as a popsicle. You had to know which rocks wouldn't explode when heated. Yes, that was a thing. and you had to master the art of not suffocating yourself with smoke while keeping the flames just right. It was like running a Michelin star kitchen with nothing but a stick and a bad attitude. Now, let's talk about the caveman's sleep strategy, because these folks weren't just throwing themselves onto a pile of hides and calling it a day. They had a system. First off, they didn't sleep alone. No. Sleeping in a pile was the move. Picture a dozen hairy, smelly humans crammed together like sardines in a can, sharing body heat like it was the last slice of mammoth at a barbecue. It wasn't romantic, but it was effective. Body heat was the ultimate hack. Your cousin Ugg might smell like he bathed in a tar pit, but his warmth was the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. Plus, if a predator wandered in, there was a decent chance it would eat Ugg first, giving you time to make a run for it. This group sleepover wasn't just about survival, it was a whole vibe. Cavemen didn't have Netflix, but they had stories. Before bed, they'd huddle around the fire, grunting out tales of the day's hunt, or that one time Grog tripped over a rock and accidentally invented the wheel. Spoiler, he didn't, but they still told the story. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were a lullaby. The rhythm of grunts, the crackle of the fire, the occasional howl of a distant wolf. It was the Ice Age equivalent of a white noise machine. And let's be real, after a day of running from predators, hauling firewood, and trying not to freeze, you were so exhausted that a slab of rock felt like a Tempur-Pedic. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sleeping in the Ice Age was a gamble. You might wake up to find your fire had gone out, leaving you in a cave so cold your eyelashes were frozen shut. Or worse, you might wake up to the sound of something big and toothy sniffing around your hide pile. And don't even get me started on the bugs. Caves weren't exactly pest-free, and you were sharing your bed with critters that saw you as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Yet, somehow, these cavemen kept at it, night after freezing night, because giving up wasn't an option. They didn't have motivational posters, but they had grit, and that was enough. So, as we wrap up this first dive into the caveman's winter slumber, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer absurdity of it all. These people turned a frozen, predator-filled nightmare into a nightly routine. They didn't have central heating, goose-down comforters, or even the concept of a snooze button, but they made it work. And they didn't just survive, they set the stage for us to be here, whining about our Wi-Fi while sipping overpriced lattes. Next time, we'll dig into the food situation, because you can't sleep well on an empty stomach, and let's just say cavemen had some creative culinary solutions. Stay tuned, because this frozen saga is just getting started. Imagine waking up in your cave, your breath visible in the dim glow of a dying fire, your stomach rumbling like a distant avalanche. It's winter, 20,000 BC, and breakfast isn't a quick trip to the fridge for some yogurt and a protein bar. No, breakfast is a high-stakes mission that might end with you as the main course for a pack of hyenas. Welcome to the caveman's kitchen, where the menu is limited, the prep time is eternal, and the health inspector is a concept that won't exist for another 22,000 years. Yet, somehow, these prehistoric pioneers not only fueled their bodies but also managed to sleep like logs through the freezing nights. How? Let's unpack the absurdity of their diet and its surprising link to their epic naps. First things first, food in the Ice Age wasn't exactly abundant. Winter turned the world into a giant freezer, and not the kind stocked with pizza rolls. The landscape was a barren wasteland of snow and ice, with most plants either dead or buried under a foot of frost. Animals? Sure, there were some, but they weren't exactly lining up to be your dinner. Woolly mammoths, reindeer, and the occasional cave bear were out there, but catching them was like trying to win a staring contest with a blizzard. Our caveman, let's call him Grog again, because it's a name that screams I hit things with rocks, had to be part hunter, part scavenger, and part miracle worker to keep his belly full enough to sleep through the night. Hunting was the main event, and it was a nightmare wrapped in a disaster. Picture Grog and his crew, armed with nothing but pointy sticks and a whole lot of optimism, tracking a mammoth through a snowstorm. These beasts were the size of a minivan, covered in fur thicker than your grandma's shag carpet, and they weren't exactly thrilled about becoming stew. A single misstep and you're not just missing dinner, you're getting trampled into the next epoch. But when the hunt paid off, oh boy, it was a feast. Mammoth meat was the caveman's equivalent of hitting the jackpot. One kill could feed the clan for weeks, assuming you could keep the scavengers at bay. The downside? Butchering a mammoth with a flint knife was like trying to carve a Thanksgiving turkey with a butter knife, except the turkey weighs 10 tons and smells like wet dog. But meat wasn't the whole story. Cavemen weren't out here living the keto dream. Variety was key, even if it was the kind of variety that makes your stomach turn. Roots, berries, and whatever scraggly plants survived the frost were fair game. Digging through frozen dirt for a shriveled tuber wasn't glamorous, but it was calories, and calories meant survival. Some clans even got fancy, grinding seeds into a gritty paste that was less artisanal bread and more edible gravel. And don't forget the bugs. Yes, bugs. Grubs, beetles, and anything that wiggled was a protein-packed snack. Crunchy, slimy, and probably still moving, these critters were the caveman's version of trail mix. Bon appetit. Now here's where it gets interesting. The food wasn't just about staying alive, it was a sleep aid. Cavemen didn't have melatonin gummies, but they had mammoth fat, and let me tell you, that stuff was liquid gold. High in calories and slower to digest, fat kept their bodies warm and their energy steady through the long, cold nights. Picture Grog chowing down on a slab of greasy mammoth blubber, his face glistening like he just ran a marathon in a butter factory. That fat wasn't just fuel, it was insulation, both for the cave and for Grog's own body. A well-fed caveman could sleep through a blizzard without waking up to find his toes had seceded from the Union. But getting that food to the table, or rather, the cave floor, was a saga of its own. Preservation was a big deal, because you couldn't just pop down to the prehistoric supermarket when you ran out of mammoth. Cavemen got creative with what they had. Drying meat over the fire was a classic move, turning strips of reindeer into jerky that could last through the winter, assuming you didn't mind chewing something tougher than your own boots. Some clans buried their kills in the frozen ground, letting Mother Nature's deep freeze act as a natural fridge. Risky? Sure. Sometimes you'd come back to find a wolf had turned your stash into its personal buffet. But when it worked, it was a game changer. Cooking was another hurdle. No stovetops, no microwaves, just a fire that was as likely to burn your cave down as it was to cook your dinner. Roasting meat over an open flame was the go-to, but it required constant attention to keep the fire just right. Too hot, and your precious bison haunch was charcoal. Too cold, and you're eating raw meat, which was less paleo diet and more, please don't give me parasites. Some clever cavemen figured out how to use heated rocks to boil water in hollowed out logs or animal stomachs. Yes, you heard that right. They'd stuff a deer's stomach with water, roots, and bits of meat, then drop in red-hot stones to make a stew that was probably as appetizing as it sounds. But it was warm, it was filling, and it helped you sleep like you just invented the concept of hibernation. Let's talk about the social side of eating, because cavemen didn't dine solo. Meals were a group affair, and not just because sharing food meant you were less likely to get shanked by a hangry clanmate. Eating together was bonding time, a chance to grunt about the day's near-death experiences while passing around a chunk of roasted hare. These communal feasts weren't just about nutrition, they were a psychological boost. After a long day of dodging predators and hauling firewood, sitting around a fire with your tribe, chewing on something that didn't fight back, was the closest thing to therapy these folks had. And a happy caveman sleeps better than a stressed one, even if happy just meant nobody tried to eat me today. Of course, it wasn't all cozy cave dinners and full bellies. Starvation was a real threat, especially in the deepest part of winter, when even the hardiest plants were gone, and the animals were either hibernating or smarter than you. Some days, Grog and his crew were lucky to scrape together a handful of frozen berries or a half-chewed bone left by a wolf. Hunger gnawed at you, making sleep elusive, but exhaustion was a powerful sedative. When you're so tired you can barely lift your spear, you'll crash on a bed of rocks and dream of mammoth steaks, no matter how empty your stomach is. And let's not gloss over the health risks. Cavemen didn't have expiration dates or food safety guidelines. That meat you left in the corner of the cave might be fine, might give you a case of prehistoric food poisoning that leaves you praying to the cave gods for mercy. Eating raw or undercooked meat was a roll of the dice. Sometimes you got lucky, sometimes you spent the night wishing you hadn't. Yet somehow, these people kept going, because giving up wasn't in their vocabulary. They ate what they could, when they could, and hoped for the best. So how did all this culinary chaos lead to better sleep? It's simple. Survival demanded it. A full belly, even if it was full of questionable stew, meant your body could focus on keeping you warm instead of screaming for calories. The act of eating together, sharing stories, and reinforcing the group dynamic reduced stress, which is a sleep killer in any era. And let's not forget the sheer physical exhaustion of hunting, gathering, and cooking in a world that wanted you dead. By the time Grog curled up under his pile of hides, surrounded by his snoring clanmates, he was too tired to care about the cold or the distant growl of a saber-toothed cat. As we wrap up this second chapter of our icy saga, let's give a nod to our caveman ancestors, who turned a diet of desperation into a recipe for survival. They didn't have cookbooks, grocery stores, or even the concept of a balanced diet, but they made it work with grit, ingenuity, and a stomach strong enough to handle half-rotten mammoth. Next time, we'll dive into the caveman's wardrobe, because you can't sleep well if you're freezing your furry bits off, and these folks had some wild fashion choices to stay warm. Stay tuned for more prehistoric absurdity, because this frozen nightmare is far from over. Welcome to the Ice Age runway, where the only trend is staying alive, and the dress code is don't freeze your hairy hide off. It's 20,000 BC, and the world is a popsicle with teeth. The wind screams through the valleys, the snow piles higher than a mammoth's ego, and the temperature is so low it could make a glacier shiver. Yet, somehow, our caveman pals, let's call our hero Grog again, because why mess with a classic, managed to wrap themselves in enough furry goodness to sleep through the night without turning into a prehistoric snow cone. Their secret? A wardrobe that was equal parts genius, desperation, and pure, unfiltered absurdity. Let's dive into the caveman's closet and see how they dressed for success, or at least survival. First off, forget everything you know about fashion. No tailored suits, no skinny jeans, no ironic vintage tees. The caveman's clothing was less couture and more whatever I can rip off a dead animal. The star of the show? Animal hides. These were the Swiss Army knife of the Ice Age, blanket, coat, and status symbol all in one. But getting those hides was no walk in the park. Imagine Grog facing down a woolly rhinoceros with nothing but a sharp stick and a bad attitude. One wrong move, and he's not just missing out on a new jacket, he's the rhino's new chew toy. If he pulls it off though, he's got enough fur to keep his whole clan toasty for the winter. Skinning the beast was its own special torture. Picture Grog hunched over a frozen carcass, scraping away with a flint blade that's about as sharp as a buttered biscuit. The hide has to be cleaned, stretched, and dried, all while you're fending off scavengers who think you're running a free buffet. Blood, guts, and frostbite are all part of the process, and if you mess it up, you're left with a soggy, smelly mess that's about as useful as a paper towel in a blizzard. But when done right, you've got a hide that's tough, warm, and smells only slightly like death. Mammoth was the gold standard, thick, furry, and built to withstand the cold. Reindeer and bison were solid runners-up, while smaller critters like foxes or rabbits were perfect for patching holes or adding a little flair. Grog wasn't winning any style points, but he was warm, and that was the real flex. Now, putting these hides together was where the caveman's ingenuity really shone, or at least flickered through the frostbite. Sewing wasn't exactly a thing yet, but they had workarounds. Bone needles sharpened to a point and threaded with sinew or plant fibers were the caveman's answer to a Singer sewing machine. Stitching a hide was like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake, except the needle's made of bone and the thread keeps snapping. Some clans got fancy, using awls to punch holes and lacing hides together like the world's clunkiest leather jacket. Others just draped the hides over their shoulders and called it a day. Because when it's -20 outside, nobody's judging your tailoring skills. Layering was the key to caveman chic. You didn't just wear one hide, you piled them on until you looked like a walking furball. Think of it as the Ice Age version of a burrito wrap, except instead of tortillas, it's reindeer skin, and instead of guac, it's existential dread. The inner layer was usually softer, like rabbit or fox, to keep your skin from chafing worse than a bad Tinder date. The outer layer was the heavy hitter, mammoth or bison, thick enough to block the wind and maybe even a stray spear. Underneath it all, you might have some woven plant fibers, if you were lucky enough to live near a patch of nettles or flax that hadn't been buried under snow. These weren't exactly cashmere sweaters, but they added an extra layer of insulation, and every degree counted when your cave was basically a walk-in freezer. Footwear was another nightmare. Bare feet in the Ice Age? That's a one-way ticket to Frostbite City, population, you. Cavemen improvised with hide wraps, tying chunks of fur around their feet like the world's saddest UGGs. Some got clever, stuffing grass or feathers inside for extra warmth, creating a prehistoric version of insulated boots. These weren't stylish, but they kept your toes from turning black and falling off, which was the only metric that mattered. And don't even think about socks. Grog's feet were tougher than a Michelin tire, calloused from years of stomping through rocks and ice. Still, stepping on a frozen twig in the middle of the night was enough to make even the toughest caveman curse in whatever grunt language they spoke. Accessories? Oh, you bet. Cavemen weren't above a little bling, even if it was just a necklace made of wolf teeth or a belt woven from bark. These weren't just for show, they were practical. A belt could hold your hides in place during a sprint from a saber-toothed cat. A necklace might double as a tool or a status symbol, letting everyone know you'd survived a wolf attack and had the dental receipts to prove it. Some clans even used shells or bones as fasteners, the Ice Age equivalent of a safety pin. It wasn't Gucci, but it was functional, and function was the name of the game when the alternative was freezing solid. So how did this furry fashion show help with sleep? Simple. If you're not warm, you're not sleeping. A well-dressed caveman could crawl into his pile of hides, surrounded by his equally furry clanmates, and trap enough body heat to make it through the night. Those layers didn't just keep the cold out. They created a microclimate, a little bubble of warmth that turned a cave floor into a tolerable bed. The psychological boost was real, too. When you're wrapped in the skin of a beast you killed with your own hands, you feel like a badass, even if you're secretly terrified of the dark. That confidence helped Grog drift off, dreaming of his next hunt instead of worrying about becoming someone else's dinner. Of course, it wasn't all cozy fur cocoons and sweet dreams. Hides were heavy, smelly, and prone to rotting if you didn't maintain them. Imagine trying to sleep in a damp, moldy mammoth hide that smells like a locker room after a double overtime game. Parasites were a constant guest star. Fleas, ticks, and other creepy crawlies loved a good fur coat as much as you did. And don't forget the maintenance. A tear in your hide could mean the difference between life and death, so you'd spend hours scraping, drying, and patching, all while your fingers were too numb to feel the needle. Fashion was pain, but pain was just another day in the Ice Age. Let's not kid ourselves. Being a caveman was a brutal gig. Your wardrobe was a patchwork of blood, sweat, and animal guts, held together by sheer willpower and a few strands of sinew. Yet, somehow, these folks made it work. They turned the pelts of their enemies into armor against the cold, and that armor let them sleep soundly in a world that wanted them dead. As we close out this third chapter of our frosty epic, give a grudging nod to Grog and his clan, who rocked the fur look with a swagger we can only dream of. Next time, we'll dive into the caveman's sleep rituals, because even in the Ice Age, there was a method to their madness, and it's weirder than you think. Stay tuned for the final dose of prehistoric insanity. Welcome to the final act of our Ice Age slumber party, where the nights are long, the caves are cold, and the only thing keeping you from becoming a saber-toothed cat's midnight snack is a pile of smelly hides and a whole lot of grit. It's 20,000 BC, and our caveman friend Grog is ready to clock out after another day of dodging death, hauling firewood, and chewing on whatever didn't chew him back. But sleep in the Ice Age wasn't as simple as flopping onto a pile of mammoth fur and snoring until spring. Oh no, these folks had rituals, weird, superstitious, and occasionally gross rituals, that turned their caves into prehistoric sleep spas. Let's dive into the madness of how cavemen turned off the world and caught some Z's in a frozen hellscape. First, let's talk about the pre-sleep vibe check. Cavemen didn't have lavender candles or ASMR playlists, but they knew how to set the mood. The fire was the star of the show, crackling away like the world's oldest campfire jam session. Keeping it going was a sacred duty. Let that fire die, and you're not just cold, you're vulnerable. Grog and his clan would spend the evening stoking the flames, piling on logs they dragged through the snow with frostbitten fingers. The fire wasn't just for warmth, it was a ritual in itself. The flickering light, the smoky haze, the rhythmic pop of burning wood. It was the Ice Age equivalent of a white noise machine, lulling the clan into a trance as they huddled together, grunting about the day's near misses. Storytelling was the next step in the caveman's bedtime routine, and it wasn't just for kicks. Picture the clan gathered around the fire, their shadows dancing on the cave walls like a prehistoric movie theater. Someone, probably the elder with the longest beard, would start grunting out a tale about the time they outran a cave bear or accidentally discovered fire by rubbing two sticks together in a fit of rage. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were a psychological anchor. In a world where every day was a gamble, hearing about survival, even if it was embellished with a few extra saber teeth, reminded everyone they weren't alone. That sense of community was a sleep aid stronger than any modern-day chamomile tea. Plus, the monotony of the elder's droning voice could knock out even the most wired caveman. But the real magic happened when the stories wound down and the clan got serious about sleep prep. Cavemen were superstitious as hell. When your world is full of invisible dangers, you start seeing spirits in every shadow. Before bed, they'd perform little rituals to ward off the bad juju. Some would toss a bone or a handful of ash into the fire as an offering to whatever cave gods they believed in, hoping it would keep the wolves at bay. Others would mark the cave walls with charcoal sketches, stick figures of hunters, animals, or weird squiggles that probably meant, "Please don't let me die tonight." These weren't just doodles, they were a plea for protection, a way to feel in control, in a world that was anything but. Did it work? Who knows? But if it helped Grog sleep without jumping at every rustle, it was worth the charcoal smudges on his fingers. Then there was the physical prep, because you don't just dive into a pile of hides without a plan. Cavemen were obsessive about their sleeping arrangements, and for good reason. One bad night could mean waking up with frostbite or not waking up at all. They'd fluff their bedding, which sounds cute until you realize fluffing meant shaking out a pile of leaves and hides to dislodge the bugs and rocks. They'd rearrange the hides to maximize warmth, layering them just so to trap body heat. Some clans got fancy, digging shallow pits in the cave floor to create a nest-like depression that kept everyone snug. It wasn't exactly a memory foam mattress, but it was better than sleeping on a slab of ice-cold stone. Positioning was everything. The clan slept in a pile, like a litter of puppies with worse hygiene. The strongest members, Grog included, took the outer edges, acting as human windbreaks for the kids and elders in the center. This wasn't just chivalry, it was strategy. If a predator wandered in, it would likely go for the guy on the outside, giving the others a chance to wake up and throw rocks. Body heat was the real MVP here, turning the pile into a living furnace. You might be pressed against your cousin Ugg, who smells like he bathed in mammoth grease, but his warmth was the difference between dreaming of bison and waking up as a popsicle. The downside, snoring, farting, and the occasional elbow to the face. Privacy wasn't a thing in the Ice Age, and neither was personal space. Let's not forget the role of exhaustion. Cavemen didn't need sleep apps to track their REM cycles. They were so tired from surviving that sleep wasn't optional, it was inevitable. A day spent hunting, gathering, sewing hides, and keeping the fire alive was like running a marathon while being chased by a lion. By the time Grog crawled into his hide pile, his body was screaming for rest. Hunger, cold, and fear were constant, but exhaustion was the ultimate sedative. It didn't matter if the cave was damp or if something was growling outside. When you're that tired, you sleep, even if your pillow is a rock and your blanket smells like a dead reindeer. Some clans took it a step further with what we'd call proto-medicine. No, they didn't have pharmacies, but they had plants and they weren't afraid to experiment. Certain herbs, think prehistoric chamomile or valerian, were chewed or steeped in hot water, using those hot stone boiling tricks we talked about, to make a bitter tea that might just calm your nerves. Was it effective? Maybe. Was it risky? Definitely. One wrong plant and you're not sleeping, you're hallucinating or worse. But when it worked, it was like discovering the wheel of relaxation. Grog might chug a mouthful of mystery leaf juice, feel a little less like the world was out to get him, and drift off into a dream where he's the king of the cave. Dreams were a big deal too. Cavemen didn't have Freud to analyze their subconscious, but they believed dreams were messages from the spirits, or at least a good excuse to brag about their imaginary mammoth hunts. Before sleep, some would mutter chants or make offerings, hoping to steer their dreams towards something pleasant, like a successful hunt, instead of, say, being chased by a giant sloth. These rituals weren't just superstition. They were a way to mentally prepare for sleep, to let go of the day's stress and focus on surviving tomorrow. In a way, it was the Ice Age version of meditation, except instead of it was, please don't let me die. Of course, it wasn't all warm fuzzies and herbal tea. Sleep was a battlefield. You might wake up to find the fire had gone out, plunging the cave into darkness so cold it felt like betrayal. Or you'd hear a rustle and spend the next hour clutching your spear, wondering if it's just the wind or a cave lion shopping for dinner. And let's not forget the kids, because even in the Ice Age, babies didn't care about your sleep schedule. A crying toddler could wake the whole clan, turning your cozy hide pile into a grumpy, prehistoric mosh pit. Yet, somehow, these folks kept at it, night after frozen night, because quitting wasn't an option. As we close out this epic tale of caveman slumber, let's tip our furry hats to Grog and his clan. They didn't have heated blankets, white noise machines, or even the concept of a weekend, but they turned caves into sanctuaries, meals into sleep aids, hides into armor, and rituals into a lifeline. Their world was a frozen nightmare, yet they slept through it, fueled by grit, ingenuity, and a stubborn refusal to die. So, the next time you're tossing and turning because your mattress is too firm or your neighbor's dog won't shut up, spare a thought for our ancestors, who made it work with nothing but a rock, a hide, and a dream. Thanks for joining me on this chilly journey. Until next time, keep your fires burning and your hides furry. Let's set the stage for this frozen nightmare. It's 20,000 BC and the world is a frosty death trap. The Ice Age has turned the landscape into a glittering wasteland of snow and ice where the sun seems to clock out early, muttering, "Good luck, suckers," as it dips below the horizon. The air is so cold it feels like breathing broken glass, and every gust of wind is a personal attack. You're a caveman, let's call you Grog, because it's got that perfect grunt-worthy ring, and your daily mission is simple: stay alive. That means dodging predators with teeth the size of your arm, finding food in a world where even the berries are hiding, and somehow getting enough shut-eye to do it all again tomorrow. But here's the kicker, you're not doing any of this alone. Sleeping solo in the Ice Age? That's like signing up for a one-way ticket to the afterlife, and the afterlife doesn't have a return policy. Why was sleeping alone such a bad idea? Let's start with the obvious, the cold. Winter in the Ice Age wasn't just chilly. It was a bone-deep, soul-crushing freeze that could turn your fingers black before you could blink. Caves were the best bet for shelter, but they weren't exactly cozy. Think damp, drafty, and smelling like a mix of mold and whatever animal died in the corner last week. Your bed? A pile of leaves and hides that you spent all day scraping together, probably while cursing the universe in a series of inventive grunts. Alone, you're just one shivering body against the elements, and your body heat is about as useful as a flint knife in a snowball fight. But huddle up with your clan, your smelly, hairy, probably snoring clanmates, and suddenly you've got a living furnace. Body heat was the caveman's secret weapon, turning a freezing cave into a slightly less freezing cave. Picture Grog, wrapped in a mammoth hide that smells like regret, squeezing in next to his cousin Ugg and a half-dozen other cave dwellers. It's not exactly a slumber party with pillows and popcorn, more like a survival pact sealed with sweat and mutual desperation. Everyone's pressed together so tight you can't tell where one hairy leg ends and another begins. It's gross, it's awkward, and it's probably the only reason Grog wakes up with all his toes still attached. Body heat wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. One person's warmth might keep you from hypothermia, but a whole clan's worth. That's the difference between waking up and becoming a permanent part of the cave decor. But the cold was just the tip of the iceberg. Pun absolutely intended. Predators were the real nightmare. The Ice Age was like a zoo where all the cages were open and the animals were very, very hangry. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, wolves, pick your poison. These beasts weren't just lurking in the shadows. They were actively shopping for dinner, and a lone caveman was an easy meal. Sleeping alone in a cave was like hanging a neon sign that said "Free buffet, open all night." A single grunt or rustle could draw a predator right to your doorstep, and good luck fending off a 500-pound cat with nothing but a pointy stick and a bad case of bedhead. But sleep in a group, and you've got numbers on your side. A dozen cavemen waking up in a panic, shouting and waving spears, might just convince that saber-tooth to go hunt something less noisy. The group dynamic wasn't just about scaring off predators, it was about early warning systems. Cavemen weren't stupid. They knew someone had to keep watch. Sleeping in a pile meant there was always at least one poor soul who couldn't drift off, either because Ugg's elbow was in their face or because they were paranoid about that weird noise outside. That guy became the unofficial night guard, ears perked for the telltale crunch of snow or the low growl of something big and hungry. If danger showed up, the whole clan would be up and swinging before the predator could say appetizer. Alone, Grog would have to rely on his own senses, and let's be real. After a day of running from danger and hauling firewood, his senses were about as sharp as a frozen turnip. Then there was the psychological angle. The Ice Age wasn't just physically brutal, it was a mental meat grinder. Every day was a gauntlet of fear. Fear of starving, fear of freezing, fear of becoming a snack for something with sharper teeth. Sleeping alone meant facing that fear in the dark, with nothing but your own thoughts and the howling wind to keep you company. Good luck relaxing when every creak sounds like a cave bear's RSVP to your funeral. But in a group, you had backup. The presence of others, even if they smelled like a mix of sweat and mammoth grease, was a reminder that you weren't facing the world alone. That sense of security was like a prehistoric Xanax, calming your nerves enough to let you drift off, even if the guy next to you was snoring loud enough to wake a hibernating bear. Let's talk about the practical side of group sleeping, because it wasn't just about cuddling for warmth or safety. Cavemen were resource hoarders, and sleeping together was a way to stretch what little they had. Hides were hard won. Everyone represented a battle with a beast, hours of scraping and drying, and a whole lot of swearing in whatever proto-language they used. A single person might need a whole mammoth hide to stay warm, but a group could share, layering hides over the whole pile like a furry lasagna. Same went for the fire. Keeping it going was a full-time job, and a lone caveman might burn through his wood stash before midnight. In a group, you could take turns stoking the flames, ensuring the cave stayed warm without anyone having to pull an all-nighter. Of course, group sleeping wasn't all cozy vibes and shared resources. It was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to find a comfortable spot in a pile of wriggling, grumbling humans, all jockeying for the warmest spot near the fire. You've got Ugg's foot in your face, someone's elbow digging into your ribs, and the distinct smell of last week's stew wafting from someone's breath. Personal space? Not a thing. Hygiene? A distant dream. And don't even get me started on the snoring. Cavemen didn't have earplugs, so if your clanmate sounded like a dying walrus, you just had to deal with it. Yet, somehow, this chaotic pile of humanity was better than the alternative, because the alternative was waking up dead. The social glue of group sleeping can't be overstated. Cavemen didn't have therapy or self-help books, but they had each other. Huddling together wasn't just about survival, it was about bonding. Before bed, they'd share stories, grunted tales of hunts gone wrong, or that one time Grog tripped over a rock and invented the faceplant. These moments built trust, and trust was the currency of the Ice Age. Knowing your clan had your back made it easier to close your eyes, even when the world outside was a frozen nightmare. It wasn't love, exactly, but it was close enough to keep the existential dread at bay. As we wrap up this first chapter of our caveman sleep saga, let's give a grudging nod to Grog and his hairy posse. They turned a freezing, predator-filled world into a place where they could catch a few hours of sleep, all because they refused to go it alone. Sleeping together wasn't just a strategy, it was a lifeline, a middle finger to the Ice Age that said, "You can't kill us all at once." Next time, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of how they made these group sleepovers work, from cave selection to the art of not smothering your neighbor. Stay tuned, because this prehistoric slumber party is just getting started. We're back in the Ice Age, where the world is a frozen meat locker, and the only thing standing between you and a one-way ticket to Frostbite City is your clan's collective body heat. It's 20,000 BC, and our caveman hero, Grog, is gearing up for another night of squeezing into a pile of hairy, muttering humans, all trying to survive a winter that makes a polar vortex look like a beach vacation. Sleeping together wasn't just a cozy choice, it was a matter of life and death. But making it work? That was a logistical nightmare worthy of its own epic poem. If only cavemen had invented poetry instead of just grunting about mammoths. Let's unpack the absurd, gritty, and downright ridiculous ways they turned group sleeping into a survival strategy. First up, the cave itself. You didn't just stumble into any old hole in the ground and call it home. Choosing a cave was like picking a bunker in an apocalypse. except your real estate agent is a blizzard and the neighbors are wolves. Grog and his clan were picky, and for good reason. Location was everything. A south-facing cave was the holy grail, catching whatever pathetic sunlight managed to limp through the Ice Age clouds. That sunlight could mean the difference between a cave that was merely cold and one that was a full-on icebox. Size mattered too. Too big and you're trying to heat a cavern with a fire the size of a birthday candle. Too small and you're all breathing in each other's faces, which, given the lack of toothpaste, was its own kind of torture. The cave had to be defensible, because nothing says bad night like a cave bear crashing your sleepover. Grog would scout for entrances narrow enough to block with rocks or hides, turning the cave into a fortress against anything with claws and an attitude. Airflow was another headache. Too much draft and you're sleeping in a wind tunnel. Too little and you're choking on smoke from your precious fire. The perfect cave was like Goldilocks porridge. Just right, except instead of porridge, it's a damp, rocky hole that smells like despair. Finding it meant days of trudging through snow, dodging predators, and praying you didn't pick a cave already claimed by something bigger and hungrier than you. Once you had your cave, setting it up was a whole other ordeal. The floor was rarely flat. Think jagged rocks and the occasional puddle of mystery liquid. Grog and his crew would spend hours clearing debris, smoothing out the ground, or even digging shallow pits to create a cozy sleeping nest. Then came the bedding, which was less fluffy duvet and more whatever we could scrape together without dying. Hides were the star players, mammoth for the heavy-duty outer layer, reindeer or fox for something softer against the skin. These were laid down in layers, like a prehistoric lasagna, to trap heat and keep the cold from seeping up through the ground. If you were lucky, you'd throw in some leaves or grass for extra insulation, but lucky usually meant wrestling thorns and dodging angry rodents to get it. The fire was the heart of the operation, and keeping it going was a sacred art form. Cavemen didn't have matches or lighters, just flint, tinder, and a whole lot of patience. Starting a fire in a damp cave with frozen wood was like trying to light a cigarette in a hurricane. Once it was going, you guarded it like it was your firstborn. The clan would take turns tending it, because letting it die out wasn't just a bummer, it was a death sentence. The fire's placement was critical. Too close, and you're roasting like a mammoth kebab. Too far, and you're shivering under your hides. Some clans got fancy, building stone rings to contain the flames or digging small trenches to direct smoke out of the cave. It wasn't exactly central heating, but it was close enough to keep everyone from turning into icicles. Now, let's talk about the sleeping arrangement itself, because piling a dozen people into a cave wasn't as simple as everybody squeeze in. There was a hierarchy, whether they admitted it or not. The strongest, like Grog, took the outer edges of the pile, acting as human shields against drafts and predators. Kids and elders got the prime real estate in the center, where it was warmest and safest. This wasn't just kindness, it was strategy. The clan needed its young and wise to survive, so Grog and his buddies took one for the team, even if it meant waking up with a frozen beard. Positioning also depended on who you trusted not to kick you in their sleep or steal your best hide. Spoiler, nobody trusted Ugg, who had a reputation for rolling over and crushing everyone like a furry steamroller. The actual act of sleeping together was a masterclass in chaos management. Imagine trying to coordinate a group of exhausted, grumpy cavemen, all trying to claim the spot closest to the fire without starting a fight. There were no assigned places, but there was definitely a pecking order. The best hunters or the guy who could make the biggest fire got first dibs, while the new guy or the one who kept burning the stew got stuck near the drafty entrance. Getting everyone settled was like herding cats, except the cats are hairy, armed with spears, and arguing in grunts about who gets the softest reindeer hide. Once everyone was in place, though, the pile became a fortress of warmth, with bodies pressed so close you could feel your neighbor's heartbeat, or their indigestion from last night's questionable stew. Hygiene? Yeah, that was a pipe dream. Cavemen didn't have showers or deodorant, so the sleep pile was a sensory assault. Picture the smell of unwashed bodies, mammoth grease, and smoke, all mixed with the faint whiff of whatever critter last owned your bedding. Bugs were a constant roommate. Fleas, lice, and other crawlies loved a warm hide pile as much as you did. Scratching was just part of the bedtime routine, like brushing your teeth is today, except instead of minty freshness, you're flicking off parasites and praying they don't come back. Yet, somehow, this sweaty, itchy, smelly mess was better than sleeping alone, because alone meant dead, and nobody wanted to be the guy who didn't wake up. The social dynamics of the sleep pile were a soap opera in themselves. Sleeping together wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. You had to believe your clanmates wouldn't ditch you if a predator showed up or steal your share of the hides in the middle of the night. Arguments happened. Grog might shove Ugg for snoring too loud, or someone might accuse another of hogging the fire's warmth. These spats could escalate into full-on grunt fests, but they rarely turned violent. Why? Because the clan needed each other. One less body meant less heat, less protection, less chance of making it to spring. So, they grumbled, they shoved, but they stuck together, because the alternative was a lonely, frozen grave. Let's not sugarcoat it. Group sleeping was a nightmare of logistics, smells, and bruised egos. But it worked. The cave, the fire, the hides, the pile. It all came together to create a bubble of safety in a world that wanted to eat you alive. Grog and his clan turned chaos into routine, proving that even in the Ice Age, teamwork made the dream work. As we close out this second chapter, let's salute these prehistoric survivors, who made sleeping in a sweaty heap look like a 5-star resort. Next time, we'll dive into the rituals that turned these sleep piles into something almost sacred, because even cavemen had their bedtime prayers, and they were weirder than you think. Stay tuned for more frozen absurdity. Welcome back to the frozen nightmare of 20,000 BC, where the world is a frosty death trap, and the only thing keeping our caveman hero, Grog, from becoming a popsicle is a sweaty pile of clanmates and a fire that's one gust of wind away from betrayal. Sleeping in a group wasn't just about staying warm or scaring off saber-toothed cats. It was a ritual, a sacred routine that turned a cave into a sanctuary against a world that wanted you dead. Cavemen didn't have churches or self-help gurus, but they had superstition, desperation, and a knack for turning fear into bedtime stories. Let's dive into the weird, wild, and occasionally gross rituals that made group sleeping the heart of Ice Age survival. First off, cavemen were superstitious as hell. When every shadow could be a predator and every storm felt like the sky was personally out to get you, you started seeing spirits everywhere. Before the clan could even think about sleep, they had to appease the invisible forces that seemed to control their fate. Picture Grog and his crew gathered around the fire, its flickering light casting eerie shapes on the cave walls. Someone, probably the elder with the wildest beard, would lead a ritual to ward off bad luck. This might mean tossing a bone into the fire as an offering to whatever cave gods they believed in, hoping it would keep the wolves from sniffing around. Or maybe they'd sprinkle ash around the cave's entrance, like some prehistoric version of a do not disturb sign for evil spirits. Did it work? Who cares? It made them feel like they had a shred of control, and that was enough to calm their nerves before bed. Storytelling was the backbone of the pre-sleep ritual, and it was more than just entertainment. As the fire crackled and the clan huddled together, someone would start grunting out a tale, maybe about the time they outsmarted a mammoth, or the day Grog accidentally invented fire by tripping over a flint. These weren't just campfire stories, they were a psychological lifeline. In a world where death was always one bad decision away, hearing about survival, even if it was exaggerated to include a few extra saber teeth, was like a shot of prehistoric whiskey. It reminded everyone they weren't alone, that their clan had beaten the odds before and could do it again. The rhythm of the storyteller's voice, mixed with the fire's pop and the distant howl of the wind, was a lullaby that could knock out even the most paranoid caveman. By the time the story ended, half the clan was already snoring, dreaming of bison instead of doom. But the rituals didn't stop at stories. Cavemen were big on physical markers, like they were trying to leave a Yelp review for the spirits. Cave art was a big part of this. Those stick figures and squiggles you see in history books, they weren't just doodles. Before bed, Grog might grab a piece of charcoal and sketch a hunter spearing a deer, or a weird spiral that probably meant, "Please don't let a bear eat me tonight." These drawings were part prayer, part therapy, a way to externalize the fear that kept you awake. Some clans went further, carving bones or stacking rocks in specific patterns at the cave's entrance, like a prehistoric security system. It was less about actual protection and more about convincing yourself the universe wasn't out to get you. In a world without science, superstition was the next best thing, and if it helped you sleep, it was worth the effort. Then there was the food ritual. because you don't sleep well on an empty stomach, and cavemen knew it. Eating together before bed was a sacred act, even if the menu was a sad mix of dried meat and half-frozen roots. The clan would gather around the fire, passing around chunks of whatever they'd managed to scavenge or kill. Sharing food wasn't just about calories, it was about trust. If Ugg gave you a piece of his hard-won reindeer jerky, it meant he wasn't planning to shank you in your sleep. That trust was the glue that held a sleep pile together, because nobody wants to cuddle up next to someone they think might steal their hide. Plus, a full belly, especially one loaded with fatty mammoth blubber, kept your body warm through the night, acting like a slow-release heater while you dreamed of better days. Some clans took it a step further with what we'd call proto-medicine. They didn't have pharmacies, but they had plants, and they weren't afraid to play chemist. Certain herbs, maybe something like prehistoric chamomile or a bitter root that made your tongue curl, were chewed or boiled into a tea using hot stones dropped into a hollowed-out log. This wasn't exactly Starbucks, but it was calming, maybe even mildly sedative. The catch? One wrong plant and you're not sleeping. You're tripping balls or praying to the cave gods for mercy. But when it worked, it was like discovering the wheel of relaxation, easing the clan into a state where they could actually close their eyes without jumping at every creak. Dreams were a big deal too. Cavemen didn't have Freud to overanalyze their nightmares, but they believed dreams were messages from the spirits, or at least a good excuse to brag about imaginary heroics. Before sleep, some would mutter chants or make offerings, hoping to steer their dreams towards something pleasant, like a successful hunt instead of, say, being chased by a giant sloth. These chants weren't exactly Shakespeare, just rhythmic grunts that probably sounded like a drunk toddler reciting a grocery list. But they served a purpose, focusing the mind and drowning out the fear. It was the Ice Age version of counting sheep, except instead of sheep, you're counting reasons you're still alive. Of course, these rituals weren't foolproof. The fire could die, leaving the cave dark and cold. A poorly chosen herb could leave you puking instead of sleeping. And those cave drawings? They didn't stop a determined predator from wandering in. The rituals were as much about hope as they were about results, a way to impose order on a chaotic world. But they worked often enough to keep the clan coming back, night after frozen night. The act of performing them, tossing bones, drawing squiggles, sharing stories, created a routine. And routine was a lifeline when every day was a roll of the dice. Let's not kid ourselves. Life in the Ice Age was a brutal slog. The rituals were a mix of faith, desperation, and sheer stubbornness, but they turned a cave full of scared, smelly humans into a community that could face the dark together. Grog and his clan didn't just survive. They built a system that let them sleep soundly, even when the world outside was a frozen horror show. As we wrap up this third chapter, let's raise the imaginary mammoth bone to these prehistoric weirdos who turned fear into art and grunts into lullabies. Next time, we'll dive into the aftermath, how these group sleepovers shaped their society and kept the human race stumbling forward. Stay tuned for the final dose of Stone Age madness. Welcome to the grand finale of our prehistoric sleepover epic, where the Ice Age is serving up death on a frozen platter, and our caveman hero, Grog, is clinging to life by huddling with his smelly clanmates in a cave that smells like despair and last week's mammoth stew. Sleeping together wasn't just a cozy quirk, it was the heartbeat of survival, a gritty, sweaty ritual that kept the clan alive and the human race stumbling toward the future. In this final chapter, we're peeling back the layers of fur and fear to see how these group sleepovers shaped caveman society, built unbreakable bonds, and ensured our ancestors didn't end up as saber-toothed cat chow. Let's dive into the absurd, brutal, and surprisingly profound aftermath of never sleeping alone. Group sleeping wasn't just about staying warm or scaring off predators, it was the foundation of caveman society. Picture Grog and his clan packed into their cave like sardines in a furry can, sharing body heat, stories, and the occasional elbow to the face. This wasn't just a practical choice, it was a social contract written in sweat and survival. Every night spent in that pile reinforced the idea that nobody makes it alone. The clan was everything. Your family, your army, your only shot at seeing another sunrise. Sleeping together built trust in a world where trust was rarer than a warm day in January. If Ugg shared his reindeer hide or took a shift watching the fire, it meant he had your back and you had his. That trust didn't just help you sleep. It kept the clan functioning as a unit, ready to hunt, fight, or flee together. This bonding wasn't just warm fuzzies, it was a survival mechanism. In the Ice Age, going rogue was a death wish. A lone caveman might be tough, but he was no match for a pack of wolves or a blizzard that could bury him in minutes. The sleep pile was a daily reminder that strength came from numbers. It wasn't enough to share food or spears, you had to share space, breath, and the unspoken promise to not let each other die. This created a loyalty so fierce it could make a modern-day sports fan look like a casual. Grog didn't just sleep next to his clanmates, he relied on them, and they relied on him. That mutual dependence turned a ragtag group of hairy weirdos into a tribe, a proto-society that could take on the world, or at least the next mammoth. The sleep pile also shaped roles within the clan. Not everyone got to snooze in the center, basking in the warmest spot like some prehistoric VIP. The strongest, like Grog, took the outer edges, braving the cold and the risk of being the first to meet a prowling cave bear. Elders and kids got the cozy middle, not out of kindness, but because the clan needed their wisdom and their future. This wasn't democracy, it was survival math. Every night in the pile reinforced who was who. The protectors, the planners, the ones who'd carry the group forward. It was a brutal kind of teamwork, where your spot in the pile said as much about your role as any job title does today. And if you were the guy stuck by the drafty entrance because you burned the stew again, well, better luck next hunt. Let's talk about the psychological payoff, because the Ice Age was a mental gauntlet. Every day was a parade of fear. Fear of starvation, fear of predators, fear of the cold that could creep into your bones and never leave. Sleeping alone meant facing that fear in the dark, with nothing but the wind's howl and your own racing thoughts. But in the pile, you had company. The sound of your clanmates breathing, even if it smelled like fermented berries, was a reminder that you weren't alone. That connection was a lifeline, a prehistoric Prozac that calmed your nerves enough to let you drift off. The rituals we talked about last time, stories, chants, cave art, amplified this, turning the sleep pile into a sacred space where fear was shared and softened, if not erased. The physical benefits were just as crucial. The pile wasn't just warm, it was a heat engine. A dozen bodies pressed together could generate enough of the warmth to keep the cold at bay, even when the fire flickered low. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about energy conservation. A well-rested clan was a clan that could hunt, gather, and fight another day. Sleep deprivation in the Ice Age wasn't just a bad mood, it was a death sentence. A groggy Grog might miss his shot at a reindeer or nod off during a predator watch, and that was game over for everyone. The sleep pile ensured everyone got enough rest to stay sharp, because a single weak link could bring down the whole chain. Kids were a big part of this equation, and not just because they were cute. Though let's be honest, a cave baby wrapped in a fox pelt was probably adorable in a grubby sort of way. The sleep pile was a nursery, keeping the young warm and safe in the center, surrounded by adults who'd take a claw to the face before letting anything near them. This wasn't just about immediate survival, it was about the long game. The kids who slept through the night grew up stronger, smarter, and ready to carry the clan forward. Every snore, every shared hide, was an investment in the future, ensuring humanity didn't fizzle out in a frozen cave. It's why we're here, sipping overpriced coffee and complaining about Wi-Fi, instead of being a footnote in some saber-tooth's dinner menu. Of course, the sleep pile wasn't all harmony and survival. It was a chaotic mess of snoring, shoving, and the occasional fistfight over who got the best spot. Hygiene was a fantasy. Imagine the smell of unwashed bodies, damp hides, and a fire that's been burning for weeks. Parasites were your unwanted bedmates, crawling through the furs like they owned the place. And don't even get me started on the kids, because even in the Ice Age, babies didn't care about your sleep schedule. A crying toddler could turn the pile into a grumpy, prehistoric mosh pit, and good luck calming them down without a pacifier or a lullaby app. Yet somehow, the clan made it work, because the alternative, sleeping alone, wasn't an option. The legacy of these sleep piles goes beyond survival. They were the blueprint for human connection, the trust, the roles, the shared rituals. They laid the groundwork for everything from villages to cities to that group chat you're ignoring right now. Cavemen didn't just sleep together. They built a system that let them face a brutal world as a team. Every night in the pile was a small victory, a defiant middle finger to the Ice Age that said, "We're still here and we're not going anywhere." It wasn't pretty, it wasn't comfortable, but it was enough to keep humanity alive. One sweaty snoring, night at a time. As we close out this frosty epic, let's give a grudging salute to Grog and his clan, who turned a pile of hides and humans into a fortress against the cold, the dark, and the teeth of the wild. They didn't have mattresses, melatonin, or even the concept of a weekend, but they had each other, and that was enough. So, the next time you're tossing and turning because your neighbor's dog won't shut up, spare a thought for our ancestors, who made it through the Ice Age by never sleeping alone. Thanks for joining me on this chilly journey. Keep your fires burning, your hides furry, and your clan close. Until next time, stay warm and stay together. Hey guys, imagine waking up to the roar of saber-tooth snarling just beyond your cave entrance, your neck stiff from sleeping upright, your spine on fire from yesterday's boulder shift. Welcome to prehistoric slumber, where horizontal rest is rarer than a mammoth's sense of humor. In the next few breaths, you'll question your life choices, cower at the absurdity of survival, and perhaps reconsider the true meaning of a good night's sleep. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. They say Neanderthals slept flat like modern humans, whisking away the centuries of neck pain we endure today. But not our unsung ancestors, the cavemen of legend. Those toothpick-armed cave dwellers who thought gravity was a conspiracy. Picture old Grug, rubbing his dawn-crusted eyes against the morning light, perched on a rock with legs dangling as if auditioning for a prehistoric sit-up competition. Why on earth would anyone choose to snooze sitting up? Because in a land where every shadow might hide a hungry predator, lying down was tantamount to signing your own resignation letter from Team Mammal. Survival hacks of the Stone Age didn't come with blue light filters or lavender-scented pillows. They came in the form of rock-hard resting spots and a permanent state of suspicion. Horizontal sleep left a body too vulnerable. Limbs flailed like fish out of water, waiting for a saber-tooth to chomp through unsuspecting ribs. Sitting upright, however, was a built-in alarm system. Any rustle of grass sent the sleeper's smug backside shooting upright, eyes wide like saucers, ready to throw a spear at whatever dared approach. But this practice wasn't just about jumping at every mole cricket. It was also rebellion against the primal back pain that comes from hefting heavy rocks all day. Our ancestors quickly realized that lying flat on jagged boulders was an open invitation to spinal rebellion. So, they invented the world's first adjustable seat. Well, sort of. One leg higher than the other, a makeshift cushion of moss here, a flattened patch of earth there. Each caveman crafted his own recline, toddling around in a half-squatting circle, forever battling the dual challenges of comfort and survival. Legend tells of Barag the Bold, whose towering clan boasted the softest sleeping platforms in the whole valley, a legend likely born out of desperation when the local beavers decamped and abandoned their wood stash. Barag's innovation, the fallen log with a hint of moss, became the gold standard in upright rest. Every warrior worth his salt bragged about how they perfected the 90-degree slouch, unlocking a new level of prehistoric nirvana, with their necks swiveling like high-tech binoculars scanning the horizon for foes large or furry. Yet, the heroics of this nightly vigil masked a deeper truth. Human evolution was partly fueled by sleep deprivation-induced adrenaline. Without proper nightly horizontal rest, our ancestors developed lightning-fast reflexes. Tales were told of Gudrun the Swift, who, half asleep and half awake, once fended off a pack of hyenas with nothing more than a sharp stick and sheer determination. Sitting up had turned her into a half-zombie, half-superhero, a creature guided by pure instinct, twitching at the first hint of danger, spear thrust at the ready. And if you thought the wolves and hyenas were bad, try the biting cold slicing through bare shoulders at dawn. Without goose-down jackets or heated blankets, the discomfort of sitting upright trumped the bone-chilling alternative of lying in a damp hollow. You see, the cold monster, an actual villain in every caveman bedtime story, would sneak into the valley at night, freeze the very marrow of your bones, and then laugh as you trembled like a leaf. Sitting upright offered less surface area for frostbite to claim. It was survival geometry 101. But wait, there's more. Anthropologists, those modern cave dwellers armed with clipboards and coffee, speculate that upright sleep might have been a handy way to conserve calories. Muscles engaged to hold posture meant fewer resources spent on useless deep REM and more stored energy for chasing mammoth calves or outrunning rival clans. It was the Stone Age version of intermittent fasting, where your hunger pangs were drowned out by the thrill of "will I see tomorrow?" rather than the latest berry smoothie craze. Let us not forget the social dynamics of the evening watch. A clan gathered around the flickering fire, each member perched on a stone rim like medieval knights at the round table of suspicion. Conversation flowed, tales of epic hunts shared, and occasionally a grumbling critique of someone's posture. "Grak, you're slouching again. Do you want a saber tooth in your lap?" The upright slumber circle was more than a survival tactic. It was primal community bonding, a nightly affirmation of, we're all in this overpriced nightmare together. Contrary to Hollywood's depiction of cave life as one endless horizontal montage of snores, nighttime in the Paleolithic was a theatrical production of grunts, groans, and sudden exclamations. Head lolling forward, a snore bubbled up, then snapped shut as a twig cracked. Eyes popped open, jaws clenched on a soot-blackened piece of meat, and the silent question hung in the cold air, friend or foe. Only one way to find out. With a grunt of defiance, anyone not on watch would shoot upright, spear ready, the silhouette of a half-sleeping warrior, framed by the dancing firelight. In this ironical theater, the concept of good rest was redefined. Dreamland meant fragmented micro-naps, punctuated by bursts of adrenaline-fueled vigilance. It was survival through sleep fragmentation, a legacy imprinted in our DNA, whispering secrets in our modern alarms that buzzing at 6 a.m. is somehow natural. We endure bleary-eyed mornings and pretend coffee can replace the primal fear that drove our ancestors to maintain a half-sit posture until the sun's rays banished shadowy threats. The absurdity deepens when we consider the nightly choreography, an elaborate dance of head nods, shoulder twitches, and sudden upright lunges. It was the original video game, minus the graphics and sound effects, where every move determined life or death. And yet, through this comedic nightmare, early humans thrived, conquered continents, and somehow passed on the very trait that turned their nights into a perpetual alert system. So next time you complain about your back hurting after a Netflix binge in bed, spare a thought for Grug and his clan, who reveled in the luxury of survival, one uncomfortable sit at a time. Their plight laid the groundwork for modern endurance, teaching us that comfort is a relative notion, sometimes defined by how little you can sleep without being eaten. As absurd as it sounds, the caveman's upright slumber was a masterclass in resilience, a brutal bedtime story that echoes through millennia, and that, dear viewers, concludes our first act of prehistoric insomnia. We've unveiled the twisted logic behind sitting up in the danger zone, the social rituals that fortified early bonds, and the ridiculous lengths humans went to survive the night. Up next, the hidden art of cave hammock weaving, the legendary midnight mammoth outruns, and the shocking discovery of the world's first sardonic bedtime chant. Stay tuned for part 2 of our saga, where history's worst sleep ever gets even stranger. The cave's firelight flickered as the night deepened, and our half-asleep heroes stumbled into the next chapter of their unholy bedtime routine. With the dawn's pale promise still hours away, the clan devised the ultimate comfort contraption, the cave hammock, fashioned from braided vines and animal hides stitched together in what might charitably be called functional artistry. These suspended slings promised to cradle weary backs, provided you didn't fall out during a startled lunge. Grak the inventor, fresh from a particularly graceless tumble that landed him face first in hyena droppings, proclaimed the hammock a marvel. "It's like being a dangling carrot in the wind," he bragged, arms akimbo, as his hammock sagged perilously under his weight. The rest of the clan, torn between admiration and envy, set about weaving their own pods, each more elaborate and less structurally sound than the last. Some added decorative tassels of dried lizard skins. Others insisted on wrapping extra hides around the edges, accidentally creating the world's first cave burrito. Night fell again, and the hammock swayed gently above the cold stone. For approximately 7 glorious minutes, the sleepers experienced genuine, gravity-assisted horizontal bliss. Then came, thud, the unmistakable sound of a hammock giving way. Grog the Tall plummeted like a spear practice target, landing atop Bera the Swift with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a mammoth fart. The ensuing brawl over whose fault the catastrophic collapse was provided more entertainment than the original comfort ever had. Meanwhile, Berog the Bold, who'd taken his hammock about 3 inches too high, spent the night channel surfing between perfect suspension and impromptu saily dancing as the ropes tightened. His yelps echoed through the cavern, scaring a family of cave bears into a hasty relocation, one of the few examples of interspecies Airbnb cancellation prior to the modern era. As dawn threatened to break, the clan abandoned hammocks in disgust and shuffled back to their upright seats. It was time for the legendary Midnight Mammoth Run, a tradition whereby the bravest, or most sleep-deprived, would sprint from the cave entrance to the nearest watering hole in full darkness, spear in hand, to snag fresh water and bragging rights. The rest stayed behind, perched in their upright thrones, ready to keep watch for saber-tooths or anything else that fancied itself a late-night snack. Gudrun the Swift, still riding the adrenaline high from Part 1's hyena skirmish, volunteered first. She dashed into the blackness with the panache of a caffeinated cheetah, only to screech to a halt moments later as a wall of ancient deer antlers emerged from the gloom. Stumbling over her own feet, she tumbled into a smelly bog, resurfaced grasping a tuft of reeds that counted as fresh water, and loped back to the cave in half-victory. The clan cheered, more at her survival than her victory. Her bog-fished hydration was little more than a soggy reed salad. Not to be outdone, Barog the Bold tried next, only to be intercepted by a wailing mother mammoth that mistook his torch for a disgraced calf. He sprinted backward, letting go of both his torch and dignity, tripping over Grog's discarded hammock cord and eating dirt in front of half the clan. The resulting embarrassment was so potent it doubled as a smoke signal for rival tribes to pinpoint their location. By the small hours, the clan realized the Midnight Mammoth Run was less a survival necessity and more a nightly comedy sketch. Still, the ritual endured, etched into cave walls beside crude drawings of flayed beasts and stick-figure warriors, performing yoga poses best described as prehistoric planks. Thus began the art of cave hammock weaving, only to be abandoned for the thrill of horror runs, only to be reborn next night in a cycle of absurdity and half-sleep. As weeks passed, customs evolved. The clan formed watch squads, one for upright sitting, one for hammock engineering, and one for the ludicrous night runs. Each squad rotated shifts in meticulous terrors. The hammocking squad suffered vertigo, the runners soaked through bogs, and the sitters endured saber-toothed stare-downs until the first rooster-sized dinosaur decided to audition for a role in their nightmares. During a particularly frigid week, the clan discovered another brilliant hack, the double squat. This involved pairing 2 members back-to-back, torsos leaning against each other like human support beams. Together, they formed a squat-seated hybrid that left legs burning and backs aching, but allowed a shared warmth and mutual scolding. Don't lean too far, or I'll kick your ribs at dawn. With each stifled yelp and scuffle, camaraderie blossomed, proof that misery loves company, especially if that company could be thrown out of the shared squat with minimal effort. In the lull between crises, tales abounded of the legend known as the sardonic bedtime chant, a series of guttural grunts and sarcastic refrains sung in unison to ward off nightmares. It began spontaneously when Grak, mid-snore, launched into a mocking ballad about the Sandman, a mythical creature he blamed for blinding him with desert sand during a past hunting expedition. The others joined in. Sandman, Sandman, stay away. We're already blind from dawn's first ray. If you come with your dusty tricks, we'll trap you under a mammoth's hocks. The chant, equal parts hilarious and baffling, echoed through the caves nightly, scaring off stray creatures and occasionally attracting curious wolves who found the melody intriguing. To this day, the cave walls still bear faint scratches, likely attempts by animals to record their own covers. Yet, even the chant couldn't stave off the deepest terror, the occasional intra-clan betrayal. Hunger, sleep deprivation, and the promise of the last chunk of roasted lizard meat led to midnight skirmishes. Torches flared as Grog accused Berog of meat hoarding. Bera retaliated by flinging a handful of cave dust into Grog's eyes. A stale skirmish ensued, resolved only when Gudrun, ever the peacemaker, took a spear and etched "No Meat Hoarding" above the hearth, sealing it with a dramatic spear tap. Peace reigned until someone discovered the meat stash in Gudrun's own pouch, igniting yet another round of nighttime fisticuffs. Through this absurdity, a bizarre evolution occurred. The clan became masters of sleep fragmentation. Their circadian rhythms fractured into micro-naps and alert bursts. They learned to shift their sleep muscle memory, nodding off for 20 seconds at a time, then jolting awake like caffeinated grasshoppers. Productivity soared. They could chase prey, fend off predators, and weave hammocks all before the sun crested the hills. Modern scientists, stumbling upon jars of fossilized brain matter, later speculated this was the origin of multitasking. Too bad they were nodding off mid-research. By the time the fourth full moon rose, upright sitting had become a ritual dance, one that bonded the clan in shared misery and whispered triumphs. Midnight, mammoth runs were replaced with the more sensible daylight water foraging, and hammocks were relegated to decorative relics used only when the clan was too hungover to mobilize. The sardonic bedtime chant remained, though it mutated into pre-meal anthems and post-hunt dirges. Sleep, however, remained an elusive myth, an aspirational state as distant as ice in the Sahara. And so the saga of prehistoric insomnia marched on, powered by ingenuity, reb pain, and the relentless comedy of survival. These early humans, perched precariously between slumber and oblivion, laid the foundation for every caffeine-fueled all-nighter and twitchy snooze button smack of the modern era. They taught us that comfort is a myth, vulnerability is a choice, and that the human spirit thrives best when it's half awake and fully terrified. As the embers died low and the first light of dawn painted the cave walls in gold, the clan prepared for another day of boulder shifting, spear sharpening, and awkward stretches that passed for yoga. But in their hearts, and in the creaking of their spines, echoed the legacy of those uncomfortable nights, where sitting up was less a posture and more a proclamation. I will not be eaten, yet. And with that defiant mantra, they faced the sunrise, ready to repeat the night's horrors all over again. As moonlight waned and the cave's yawning maw beckoned the chill of night, our weary clan faced yet another chapter in the epic chronicle of prehistoric insomnia. Part 3 of our saga picks up where we left off, frostbitten shoulders, jittery limbs, and that constant hum of, "Did I just hear something?" reverberating through every crag and crevice. If you thought sleeping upright was a questionable life choice, buckle up. We're about to plunge deeper into the absurd innovations, tragic misfires, and borderline heroic feats of caveman sleep science. They say necessity is the mother of invention, but in our clan's case, it was more like desperation's haggard aunt, showing up empty-handed and stealing your best rock pillow. By now, the hammocks lay abandoned like failed funhouse rides. The midnight mammoth runs had devolved into soggy pranks, and the double squat warriors were permanently bruised. The clan needed something new, something that would ward off nightmares, frostbite, and hyena ambushes all at once. Enter the leaf mattress. One dusky evening, Bera the Swift, whose legs had atrophied from too many night runs and too few actual sleeps, stumbled upon a cavern alcove lush with giant ferns. He hacked down a couple of leaves, plopped them on the ground, and gingerly tested the cushion. At first it seemed miraculous. The jagged stones couldn't pierce the verdant shield, and body heat pooled in the leaf's broad embrace. Word spread faster than a charging woolly rhino. "Leaf mattresses! It's like napping on a dinosaur's bed of feathers." That night, the cave's floor transformed into a patchwork quilt of glossy greenery. Some mattresses were as thin as paper. Others boasted layers upon layers of fronds, yielding a nesting sensation. For approximately 12 glorious seconds, the clan tasted horizontal bliss. Then came the chorus of groans. Leaves wilted under body heat, lost rigidity, and collapsed into a soggy pulp. Beds became muddy swamps, and sleepers emerged soaked in green goo, scratching out new curses in the dirt. It was the Stone Age version of modern memory foam, only less supportive and far more decomposable. Unfazed by this leafy betrayal, Grok the inventor declared an upgrade, the leaf and log hybrid. He elevated the mattress by propping logs underneath, attempting to suspend the leafy wonderland above the damp cave floor. It worked, until the logs rolled, sending the sleeper careening into a pile of bat guano. Barag the Bold, unlucky in log choice, ended up face first in the stench of 10,000 winged rodents. The smell registered on the clan's idiotic pain scale as barely tolerable, because the alternative was being eaten. While the leaf mattress fiasco unfolded, Gudrun the Swift, no relation to Bera, though both shared a tragic knack for slip-ups, proposed a daring idea: distributed micro-napping. Instead of one marathon sleep, why not 10 30-second power naps throughout the night? They'd rig a nap bell carved from hollow bone. When it tapped a rock, it signaled a nap shift. The theory was impeccable, sort of like staggered shifts at a convenience store, but with more drool and fewer fluorescent lights. On the first trial, the bell worked admirably. Ding! Grak nodded off mid-grunt, then ping, awakened to a startled yelp. The clan cycled through naps with military precision. Too bad the naps were so short that no one actually fell asleep. They just dozed off, jerked awake, and spent the rest of the night in a half-conscious fugue state, muttering ding-ding in their sleep. The whole experiment devolved into a bizarre groaning chorus, ding, 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 echoing until the first pale blush of dawn. At least no hyenas dared approach. They thought the cacophony was an angry thunderstorm. On the heels of this chaos, a breakthrough of sorts emerged, the nighttime safety drill. Inspired, somewhat, by nightmares of hand-to-hand combat with saber-toothed shadows, the clan instituted a nightly obstacle course inside the cave's mouth. They'd string vines between stalactites, hide rocks beneath leaves, and scatter hollow logs to trip over. Each runner had to navigate the gauntlet while half asleep, spear in hand, and report back on any threats discovered. The inaugural drill was enlightening. Barag, the Bold, barreled through vines, tangled himself like a woolly caterpillar, and produced what resembled a tribal beat poem. "O vines of doom, you strangle me, yet I offer no thanks." He discovered nothing except bruises, a cracked rib, and what he claimed was the ghost of a troll. Actually his own reflection in a muddy puddle. Still, the drill served its purpose. When true threats emerged, like real saber-tooth tests or roving hyenas, the clan recognized the difference between fake obstacles and actual death traps. Amid these frantic innovations, a quieter revolution took root. The art of sleep, chanting. No longer content with Grog's sardonic Sandman ballad, the clan composed a sprawling epic set to the rhythm of dripping water and distant hoots. The chant detailed every imaginable nightmare, falling into chasms, being chased by giant rodents, waking to find your face painted with mammoth dung, and concluded with a defiant refrain. Sleep, we crave, though fear we bear, wake or dream, we do not care. This chant became so elaborate that they built a chorus rock at the cave's center, a hollow basalt slab that amplified their guttural voices. Nightly rehearsals involved dramatic gesticulations, flourishes of spears, and impromptu poetry slams. Your roar's too loud, you'll wake the shrews. The effect? A soothing white noise wall that drowned out actual sounds of predators, and also drowned out each other, leading to minor arguments over key and volume. If a bear wandered by, it just heard a muffled roar and decided to nuzzle closer, thinking it found a new cuddle party. While all this unfolded within the cave, the clan's foraging parties took note. Each morning, half the members would stagger out, rubbing stubble, cursing the sun, and gather roots, berries, and questionable fungus. On the third day of the leaf mattress saga, they discovered a type of lichen that, when mashed into a paste and applied to the skin, produced a mild tingling sensation. Intrigued, the clan smeared it liberally on their shoulders and backs before bed. The results were surprising. The tingling lasted only a few minutes, but it triggered a mild euphoria, dulling muscle aches and momentarily banishing the memory of jagged stones. The clan championed the lick and rub as the closest thing to a spa treatment they'd ever experienced. Of course, the lichen also caused itchy welts in some unfortunate souls, resulting in nightly scratch-offs that sounded like prehistoric bingo games. Got a welts, got a rub burn. Bingo! By now, the clan's circadian rhythms had splintered into unpredictable shards. They measured days not by sunrise and sunset, but by episodes of lichen euphoria, bell naps, hammock hangovers, and drill bruises. Ceremonial naming rights sprung up. Grog was rebranded Grog Rashfang, Berog Log Crusher, and Gudrun Naphammer. Titles were earned in the theater of discomfort. In this haze, a singular event rose above the chaos, the Great Migration debate. As seasons shifted and the deer herds followed greener pastures, the clan argued over whether to relocate their sleep experiments to a new cave 20 miles away. Pros: softer stone floors, fewer bats, proximity to water. Cons: unknown predator density, perilous river crossing, and a route littered with angry beetles. The debate raged for days, with speeches delivered at dawn, dusk, and the ritual micro-nap interregnum. Berog invoked the leaf mattress failures to argue for change. Bera countered with tales of the hyena that almost befriended him in the old cave. Gudrun proposed a trial caravan. Send one brave soul to test the route, then decide. The brave soul, Grog Rashfang, armed with a bone-tipped spear, a battered bell, and a handful of lichen paste, Grog set out at dusk. The clan assembled at the cave mouth, chanting a send-off song that went, "Go, dear Grog, find new ground, bring back rocks less jagged found." He staggered off, disappearing into twilight, leaving behind only the echo of his grunts. Hours passed. The clan composed elegiac poems, built makeshift memorial cairns, and braced for hyena attacks, only to see Grog lurch back just as the first bird sang. He bore news. The other cave was indeed softer, with a river whose current was annoyingly vigorous, and beetles that would eat your eyebrows if you let them. But, crucially, the stones were smoother, and the cave floor sloped gently, preventing water from pooling at the entrance. Grog Rashfang survived to tell the tale, albeit sporting new welts and an amusing limp. A triumphant caravan formed. Half the clan would relocate, half would remain to perfect the current cave's insomnia techniques. Pack animals, really just hairy goats roped to spears, carried hammocks, bell systems, and leftover leaf mattresses. Preparations took days, sealing cracks with mud curtains to block wind, dragging in logs to anchor hammocks, and carving elaborate bone whistles for emergency alerts. The night before the move, they held a farewell wake, equally a celebration and a mourning for the old cave's trials. They chanted nostalgic verses, "O cave of damp and rattling drip, you taught us fear, you taught us grip." Flames flickered, lichen paste glowed faintly on weary faces, and the micro-nap bell clanged its final time in that hollow chamber. With dawn's pale hands guiding them, the caravan set out. The journey was treacherous, roots that snagged feet, bees that mistook them for giant flowers, and a river crossing that soaked half the equipment. But at last, they stood on the threshold of the new cave, smooth walls streaked with mineral veins, a gentle incline to the floor, and, most importantly, a crack wide enough to let in fresh air without inviting saber-tooths inside. That night, the relocated half of the clan attempted every hack known. Hammocks hung from sturdy stalactites, leaf-laden nests atop logs, bell-scheduled micro-naps, lichen rubs, and even a trial of nocturnal dance cardio to stave off cramps. The first thing they noticed was that no one screamed at leaf mush. They awoke to a soft cushion of moss blown in by the wind. The second was that the cave's unique acoustics amplified their chants into a soothing lullaby. For once, the multitude of inventions coalesced into an almost restful night. Meanwhile, back in the old cave, the remaining clan members faced the challenge of evolutionary arms races. They experimented with reflective rock arrangements to mimic sunrise and invented crude rock blankets by stacking flat stones atop each other. The results were mixed. The mornings were brighter but colder, and the rock blankets were heavy enough to double as bludgeons in emergencies. Thus, as the two halves of the clan drifted into their respective nocturnal routines, one group reveling in newfound but still imperfect softness, the other battling medieval HVAC nightmares, they inadvertently pioneered the world's first comparative sleep study. Centuries later, their descendants would debate whether the new cave constituted real progress, or if the old cave's misery had forged stronger spines and faster reflexes. But that, dear viewers, is a story for the final act. In Part 4, we'll reunite these branches, witness the clash of sleep philosophies, and unveil the ultimate, absurd conclusion to our prehistoric slumber chronicle. Will they discover true rest, Or will the eternal struggle between comfort and survival claim victory once more? Stay tuned, because the nightmare is far from over. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the ridge, the two halves of our once unified clan stirred in their respective caves, each nursing bruised muscles and half-remembered dreams. On one side, the new cave cohort stretched on soft moss beds, blinking at the unfamiliar luxury as if it were a hallucination. On the other, the old cave survivors rubbed soot-streaked backs, crowing about the character forged by endless discomfort. Today, at last, they would reunite, and the clash of sleep philosophies would commence in a spectacle for the ages. A messenger, no stranger to leg cramps and micro-nap delirium, slid between the camps at the river crossing, trumpet-like bone whistle in hand. His mission, to deliver an invitation, or challenge, depending on your leanings, to a grand symposium of slumber, to be held at the neutral ground of the River Bend clearing. There, the clans would showcase their finest sleep hacks, sparring verbally and physically over who had triumphed over the terror of the night. By mid-morning, both groups assembled in the clearing, half expecting saber-tooth ambushes or rogue mammoth charges, but greeted instead by the sight of one another's weary faces and eccentrically bundled gear. The air buzzed with tension. New cave advocates sported smug smiles and half-healed welts. Old cave traditionalists brandished sturdy spears and charts of broken ribs incurred from proper upright sitting. First to speak was Gudrun Knaphammer, now hailed as the clan's de facto sleep scientist. She raised her bone-tipped spear like a conductor's baton and began with a flourish. Friends, relatives, dubious acquaintances, we stand here today not as mere survivors, but as pioneers of the nocturnal frontier. In the new cave, we discovered the holy grail of rest, soft cave winds carrying lullabies, moss so fluffy it defies logic, and hammocks anchored by stalactites sturdy enough to support a mammoth calf. She swung her arms theatrically, nearly knocking over Barog Log Crusher, who winced at the memory of his ribcage meeting a stray rock. Applause, tentative and plagued by creaky joints, rose from the new cave side. Indeed, Bera the Swift chimed in, flashing a bandaged shoulder. No more soggy leaf mattresses or gnarly log hybrids. Our nights were filled with true horizontal bliss, dreams of chasing deer without fearing a hyena strike. She paused, face twisting in recollection. Granted, we did dream of hyenas chasing us, but that's the price of progress. When the cheering died down, Barog Log Crusher strode forward, spear in hand and posture alarmingly erect. "Ah, but what is rest without vigilance?" he boomed. In the old cave, we learned that comfort is often the precursor to disaster. A soft pillow might lull you into a stupor while a saber-tooth circles, unseen until your dinner. He punctuated his point with a dramatic throat-slash gesture, earning uneasy silence and a startled cough from a new cave youth clutching a fern leaf. Mattress, Grog Rashfang, ringed by scars and the dubious honor of being the only one to survive both caves, stepped into the fray. "Listen," he growled, voice gravelly from too many lick and rub-induced coughs. "I've slept on moss that felt like clouds, on jagged stones that felt like mini torture devices, and on soggy leaves that felt like swamp monsters hugging you to death. None of these methods guaranteed safety, comfort, or dignity. What we need is synthesis, so combine the softness of the new cave with the alert posture of the old cave." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few nodded enthusiastically, others glared in disbelief. Gudrun Knaphammer raised an eyebrow. "You propose a hybrid system? Remind me, is this the same Grog who once fell face first into a cave bear's den because he refused to relinquish his hammock?" A ripple of laughter followed, but Grog simply shrugged. A minor setback. And so the Great Sleep Synthesis Project was born. Under a canopy of scraggly firs, the clan partitioned into cross-cave teams. Task 1. Engineer a sleeping device melding moss comfort with upright vigilance. Task 2. Refine the micro-nap bell into a genuine alert mechanism. Task 3. Develop an aromatic repellent, something beyond lichen paste, to keep predators at bay without itching like a forest full of lice. Task 1 fell to the Inventor Guild, spearheaded by Grok the Inventor and reinforced by new cave hammock engineers. They scavenged lengths of flexible vine, bundled sheaves of soft moss, and carved a crude spring mechanism from animal sinew. The result looked like a rocking cradle crossed with a medieval torture rack, dubiously balanced but undeniably intriguing. Volunteers lay upon it, half floating above the earth, limbs supported yet free to lunge upright at the slightest disturbance. The first test, a volunteer dozed off for a full minute before jolting awake to the sound of a rock slide, planted by skeptics, yet a fair demonstration. The device passed its inaugural exam, though volunteers reported minor whiplash. Task 2 mobilized the bell artisans under the guidance of Gudrun and Bera. They hollowed thicker bone segments, fashioned clappers from polished quartz, and etched runic warning symbols along the bell's exterior. When activated by a sinew cord tied to a pressure plate, the new thunder bell produced a resonant chime, designed both to startle scorpions and awaken even the heaviest micro-napper. Impressively, during the midday demonstration, Barok slept through an entire chorus of chimes, leading to sighs from the artisans, but also the discovery that some individuals needed a louder alarm. Iterations followed: dual clapper bells, bone and wood hybrid resonators, even a prototype using hollowed out a mammoth tusk for bass tones. Task 3, the aromatic core, took to the nearby bogs in search of herbs beyond lichen. After several experiments, some ending in hallucinations or itchy welts, they settled on a blend of crushed mint leaves, wild lavender, and pine resin. When burned atop a flat stone, the resulting smoke repelled insects, dulled aches, and, most critically, masked scents that predators might track. At the evening trial, the test group claimed the air smelled like forest dreams, though a few accused the artisans of creating the world's first sedative incense, dropping off mid-demonstration in a haze of relaxation. As dusk settled, the project culminated in a grand sleep trial, a nocturnal expo to rival any modern science fair. Had science fairs existed in the Stone Age, stakes were high. The future of clan sleep depended on this spectacle. Half the clan camped on the new hybrid spring cradle, bells tied strategically to their gear, aromatic smoke wafting overhead. The other half maintained old-school methods as a control group, bracing for a night of proof or disproof. Silence fell. Firelight danced against the trees. Crickets chirped. For a few minutes, an almost magical hush permeated the clearing. Then, as if on cue, a predator's distant howl shattered the calm. The hybrid sleepers bounced upright, springs recoiling, bells clanging in frantic chorus, aromatic smoke twisting around their shoulders. A collective grunt issued from the group. Victory. They had struck the perfect balance between comfort and alertness, albeit at the cost of startling themselves every few seconds. Meanwhile, the control group fared predictably. Old cave traditionalists sat rigidly, eyes scanning the shadows. New cave purists sprawled on moss mounds. Hammock enthusiasts swung gently in makeshift slings. When the same howl echoed through their camp, reactions varied. Some sprinted upright, others blinked in confusion, and at least one new cave sleeper mumbled, "Awake? What did I miss?" A minor stampede ensued, yielding bruised limbs and quizzical looks. At dawn, the clans reconvened. The hybrid system was declared a resounding triumph. Grog Rashfang, battling a minor concussion from his cradle's spring recoil, raised his spear once more. Behold the future of slumber. Cheers erupted as testers shared anecdotes of deeper naps, faster wake-ups, and the delightful absence of soggy backs. Even the most die-hard old cave stalwarts conceded that the blend brought genuine improvements, though they maintained that true resilience required embracing at least a bit of medieval discomfort. With the synthesis complete, the clan faced their final challenge, integrating these inventions into daily life while preserving the camaraderie that had carried them through countless nights of absurd torment. They decided upon a rotational sleep schedule. Every third night, members would trial new methods and report findings. On alternate nights, they would revert to traditional upright sitting to honor their heritage. Quarterly, they would stage mini-competitions: Best Bell Tapper Award, Hammock Craft Champion, Aroma Innovator Prize, to keep spirits high and innovation alive. In the ensuing weeks, the clan thrived like never before. Hunts became more successful thanks to sharper morning reflexes. Foraging expeditions doubled in yield as members awoke well-rested. Even the cave's wildlife seemed to respect their new routine, steering clear of the aromatic smoke plume. The synergy of comfort and vigilance birthed a new era of prosperity. But tradition dies hard. A faction of old cave loyalists, angelically dubbed the Spine Forgers, refused to accept the hybrid as anything more than a soft man's contraption. They formed their own enclave within the cave entrance, vowing to maintain pure upright sleeping and deriding the aroma-infused, spring-supported nonsense as decadent. Their leader, Krog the Steadfast, stood watch nightly, refusing any lichen, moss, or bell. His posture remained so rigid that, over time, his spine curved like a question mark. Yet he smiled proudly, ribs unbroken and reflexes honed to razor edge. In response, the Bright Dreamers, adherents of the hybrid, renamed the entrance Spine Alley, festooning it with mossy banners and echoing ligamentous jokes. The division created playful rivalry, contests of endurance, spear-throwing matches, midnight chant-off challenges. Relations remained cordial. After all, both sides faced the same threats. But the competitive spark reinvigorated clan culture. Years passed. Tales of the Great Sleep Synthesis traveled beyond the valley, inspiring neighboring tribes to adopt or adapt the methods. Some went all in on the hybrid cradle, others stuck with pure bell rhythms, and a few weirdly combined the aroma smokes with hammocks, lashed to river rafts. Trade caravans carried aromatic herbs, bells became prized commodities, and moss trade routes sprouted like mushrooms. Meanwhile, our original clan aged like fine mead, crusty, heady, and occasionally prone to spilling on the floor. In the twilight of their years, the founding members, Gudrun, Berog, Grok, Bera, and Grog, gathered one last time in the riverbend clearing, now ringed by twin caves humming with restful snores. They sat, some upright, some in cradles, passing the ancient bell among them. Each rang at once, a salute to the knights of yore and the absurd journey they'd shared. Grog, voice quavering with both nostalgia and joint pain, declared, "We set out to conquer the night, yet the night remains our greatest teacher." Nods all around, spears tapping the earth in solemn rhythm. The maple-scented breeze carried their chants downstream, whispering lessons to future generations. That comfort and vigilance need not be enemies, that innovation sprouted from desperation, and that sometimes the most absurd trials yield the greatest triumphs. As the sun climbed high, they dispersed, some to teach, others to wander, all to sleep in whatever style they preferred. Behind them, the clearing fell silent save for the soft clinking of bells, the rustle of moss against wood, and the distant murmur of caverns settled into cautious peace. So ends our chronicle of prehistoric slumber, 4 parts of pain, perseverance, and the peculiar passion for not being eaten in one's sleep. From upright sentinels to hybrid cradles, from soggy leaves to aromatic bliss, our ancestors waged nightly wars against gravity, predators, and the existential dread that comes in the dark. And yet, through every jolt awake and every groan dawn, they forged the blueprint of rest that, millennia later, still echoes in our snooze buttons, bedside lamps, and bleary-eyed morning rituals. May their legacy remind us that even the most absurd insistence, sleeping, half-sitting, half-reclined, bells clanging in the night, can pave the way for genuine progress. And may your own nightmares be ever so slightly less horrifying than those of Grok, Berog, and the rest of the crew. Sleep tight if you dare, but rest assured you've nothing on a caveman's to-do list before dawn. Hey guys, imagine a world where every mistake is fatal, every lesson costs a life, and the only textbook is your own bruised ego. Welcome to the saga of cavemen passing down knowledge before writing ever existed. Feel the sting of failed hunts, the agony of burned fingers, and the absurd comedy of prehistoric mentorship in 3, 2, 1. In a time when survival hinged on knowing which berries led to a bloody exit and which plants could cure a fever, early humans developed a curriculum without classrooms. There were no libraries, no chalkboards, just the echo of voices around flickering fires. The first teachers were the grizzled elders, wizened by scars and defeat, who stood before wide-eyed apprentices to deliver their opening lecture. See that roasted mammoth leg? Burn your lips and you'll learn pain. Undercook it and you'll learn hunger. Their syllabi were brutal, their grading merciless. The primary mode of instruction was oral storytelling, an epic blend of cautionary tale and combat drill. Gathered in a semicircle on jagged stones, younglings would listen to the legend of Korga's overshoot, how Korga fumbled his spear, missed a boar by a hair, and ended up chasing a rampaging wolverine instead. Each turn of phrase was exaggerated for dramatic effect, claws bigger than boulders, snarls louder than thunder. The moral? Aim true or sleep with the worms. These stories were rife with irony, heroes simultaneously clumsy and cunning, so that each learner both laughed and shivered under the same breath. Beyond speeches, mimicry was king. Apprentices shadowed their mentors like hapless specters, one moment weaving snares, the next tumbling into thorn bushes. If you watched Grak the Steady assemble a trap, you repeated the exact motions until your fingers bled. There was no room for theory, only trial by fire. Quite literally, as they practiced fire starting by rubbing sticks until their wrists ached and the tinder ignited. A single spark was met with cheers. 5 minutes of smoke-stinging eyes meant a session cut short. Persistence was the true lesson. Mastery arrived on the other side of blistered palms. Gestures and crude sign language augmented speech. When words failed, missing letters absent after all, hand signals flew. An upward thumb meant climb that ridge. A slicing gesture across the throat signaled avoid that predator. In the dead of night, a whispered thump-thump on hollow bone would wake the clan. 2 taps for approach, 3 for retreat. Apprentices practiced these taps alongside counting stones, learning a binary code older than any scribe's quill. Its elegance lay in simplicity, life or death conveyed in 3 knocks, no scribbles required. During hunts, the master-apprentice duo operated as one organism. The apprentice maintained a safe distance, close enough to observe every shift in posture, every narrowing of the master's eyes, but far enough to avoid becoming the spear's unintended target. When the master pivoted his feet at a 37-degree angle to track a gazelle's trajectory, the apprentice took notes in the mind's ledger. The slightest misstep cost dearly. Hairs on the wind could carry the scent of your fear, so you had to internalize every nuance of stealth. By sunrise, apprentices carried in their heads a mental map of the land, shaped by whispered guidance and earthy odors. Songs and chants were another mnemonic device. Rhythm replaced pages of text. The Ballad of the Four Winds recited the cardinal directions, each verse describing the landmarks to follow. Rock pillar, twisted juniper, bubbling spring. Cadence engraved these routes into memory. Wander too far, miss the verse, and you'd end up lunch for vultures. Likewise, the harvest chant listed edible roots in descending order of bitterness, ensuring each meal was survivable. These musical lessons were punctuated by claps and foot stomps, primitive metronomes for the survival curriculum. Cave paintings served as semiotic textbooks. Apprentices watched as elders scratched murals of hunts, inscribing the number of arrows used, the hunt's direction, and the beast's final resting place. Each image was symbolic. A red smear beneath the mammoth signified which artery to pierce. These pictograms weren't elegant. They were hieroglyphics of pain and triumph, meant to trigger vivid recollections. Apprentices returned at dawn to critique their copies, with elders pointing out misplaced tusks or backward footprints. Accuracy here could mean the difference between a well-fed tribe and a starving one. Peer-to-peer teaching emerged as clans expanded. Seasoned hunters paired with novices. Mothers taught children which berries glistened with deadly juice. The pedagogy was communal. No one person held all the answers. In gathering for a mano berry identification duel, 2 foragers competed to see who avoided the most toxic greens. The loser endured a mouthful of bitter root as penalty. Lessons thus reinforced through playful brutality. Caveman reality show, minus the cameramen. Rituals solidified the knowledge transfer. On full moon evenings, apprentices presented demonstrations before the entire clan. They showcased newly mastered skills at flint knapping, hide tanning, rope braiding, under the scrutinous gaze of elders. A shaky knife blade sparked jeers. A flawlessly trimmed spearhead earned nods of grudging respect. Mistakes were replayed in post-show analyses, each crack in the blade a teachable moment. Preparing for the ritual demanded weeks of practice, forging camaraderie and sparking healthy competition. Emotional storytelling invoked empathy as a teaching tool. Elders recounted near-death experiences in vivid detail. The terror of being separated from the group in a storm, the numbness of frostbite creeping into toes, the hollow ache when a fellow hunter fell. Apprentices cried, laughed, and shuddered along, forging a visceral bond with ancestral trials. This emotional imprint ensured the lesson stuck far deeper than any lecture ever could. Danger became personal, a specter stalking each initiative. Finally, the ultimate pedagogical device was pain itself. Apprentices learned the prick of each plant, the sting of each insect bite, and the burn of each fettered ankle. Warnings delivered in hushed tones were reinforced by first-hand torment. Get too close to nettles and you'd learn fast why not to. A blister from improper footwear, a headache from inhaled smoke, each was a lesson branded into flesh. Such physical curricula required no repetition. Once burnt, forever cautious. By the time apprentices matured into seasoned adults, they embodied the clan's collective wisdom. Their gait betrayed the lessons learned, a cautious step around sinkholes, a subtle tilt of the head to sense distant rainfall, a predatory calm when tracking a wounded boar. They passed these embodied teachings to the next generation. Children who watched every twitch of their parents' gaze, every shift in footfall. Thus, knowledge circulated in endless cycles, a living tradition older than any carved stone. Part 1 of our journey ends here, where the ancient classroom consisted of rocky outcrops, dancing flames, and the sheer terror of getting it wrong. Up next, the bizarre registers of mnemonic tattoos, the savage art of memory caves, and the secret society of bone librarians who cataloged wisdom on polished femurs. Buckle up for part 2, where the cavemen's quest to write in blood and bone gets even more absurd. The elders' pictographs had barely dried when the next stage of knowledge transfer unfolded, the art of mnemonic tattoos. In a twilight ceremony beneath the shivering glow of torches, apprentices knelt before the clan's tattoo shaman, a wizened figure whose needle, and awl sharpened from flint, held the weight of collective memory. Each tattoo was not mere decoration, but a chapter of lore etched into flesh. A spiral on the forearm signified the winding river path. 3 dots along the thumb marked the seasons for berry ripeness. A curved line across the calf denoted the safe grazing grounds for young goats. The apprentice winced at each puncture, but that ring forged an indelible bond between body and wisdom. When future generations gazed upon these tattoos, they saw not art, but a living map of survival tips, anatomical guides, and emergency protocols. Every needle prick a painful lesson turned into promise. As tribal artists experimented with new designs, tattoo duels became popular among novices. 2 apprentices faced off, each reciting the meaning of every symbol on their opponent's skin. Misidentify a spiral for a mountain pass, and you earned an extra line of ink, a humbling reminder that sloppy memory spelled disaster. These duels played out beside roaring fires, spectators wagering future responsibilities. The winner might gain stewardship of the best hunting grounds. The loser found himself hauling water at dawn. Pain and pride intertwined, ensuring that each mark served as both mnemonic device and rite of passage. Yet tattoos could only carry so much information. For deeper lore, seasonal migrations, medicinal concoctions, celestial navigation, the clan turned to the memory cave. This subterranean gallery lay hidden behind a waterfall at the valley's edge, accessible only to those who could recite the secret melody that mimicked the waterfall's rhythm. Once inside, apprentices encountered walls covered in intricate bas-relief carvings, animals chasing prey across sprawling narratives, medicinal herbs arrayed like botanical diagrams, constellations mapped in interlocking grooves. But these carvings were not merely static images. They were staged in reading zones, where torchbearers invoked dramatic storytelling rituals. Under the sway of lamplight, an elder's shadow would animate the carvings, tracing the path of the bison jump or the swirling arms of a winter storm. Apprentices moved from station to station, guided by whispered chants that mapped each carving to a story and its moral. Follow the Great Bear across the northern peaks to find the summer's water. Stray and you'll perish of thirst. Access to the memory cave was restricted. Only those who had endured a year of apprenticeship, mastered the tattoo tests, and passed the bell count ritual, where trainees kept perfect count of hundreds of midnight bell strikes, could enter. The more advanced novices became cave scribes, though their scribal work relied on chisels and pigments rather than ink. They maintained the carvings, deepened grooves to preserve clarity against erosion, and added new panels to reflect recent trials, the memory of the great flood that submerged half the berry fields, the battle against the river serpents that threatened the fishing lines, and the discovery of the healing hot springs hidden beneath boiling mud. Each new panel bore the names of contributors, so that future generations honored not only the lore, but the living history of its keepers. Parallel to these visual archives, a secret society known as the Bone Librarians emerged. These custodians collected polished femurs, rib fragments, and tusks from fallen beasts and honored ancestors alike, and carved them into scroll-like records. On each bone's smooth surface, glyphs detailed specialized knowledge, flint knapping measurements etched into a mastodon rib, herbal ratios balanced on the curved interior of a goat femur, tactics for ambushing wolves inscribed around the arc of an elk scapula. They wore leather pouches strung across chests, each containing half a dozen bones strung together by sinew, forming knowledge talismans that could be consulted mid-hunt. Apprentices learned to read these bones by aligning them in sequence, much like the pages of a book. Rotate the rib, and you unlock the next chapter on bow tension and arrow fletching. The Bone Librarians maintained rigorous protocols. During the annual Bone Council, the librarians convened in ceremonial robes, animal hides dyed with ochre and charcoal, and exchanged knowledge talismans. They recited the Ode of Ossuary, a chant that invoked the spirits of both beast and ancestor, calling upon goodwill for the coming year's hunts and harvest. New librarians earned their rank by navigating the bone maze, a labyrinth of hanging rib fragments and dangling skull remains, while reciting the entire sequence of the healing herb glyphs. Any slip of memory resulted in a wrong turn and a symbolic bite from the hanging bones, reminding apprentices that the lines between success and failure could be razor thin. Outside the caves, the clan's gatherings evolved into full-scale educational festivals. Twice a year, when autumn's crimson waned and spring's green emerged, neighboring tribes converged on the Valley of Echoes for the Festival of Whispered Wisdom. There, apprentices from multiple clans demonstrated skits depicting legendary hunts, battled in mock tattoo duels, raced through artificial memory mazes, and traded bone talismans in crowded barter circles. These cross-tribal exchanges spurred innovation. One clan's refined leaf dye ink allowed tattoos to retain pigment through frost. Another's spiral-bound bone sequences introduced a reliable pagination system. Through trade, knowledge blossomed beyond isolated pockets, forming a network of oral, visual, and tactile teaching mechanisms that spanned entire regions. Meanwhile, the role of ritual became more pronounced. Every critical piece of knowledge, how to treat a broken bone, how to butcher a mammoth, how to navigate by starlight, was enshrined in multi-day rites. For instance, the rite of the shattered arrow commemorated the invention of the composite bow. Apprentices endured a night of fasting, then stood barefoot in a circle of shattered arrowheads while a chorus of creaks, elders swaying in unison, sang the steps of composite bow construction in guttural verse. At dawn, the apprentices presented their own bows for inspection. Failure meant another night of fasting and chanting. Success earned the title Shard Bearer, conferring the right to teach the next generation the art of fletching with sinew and resin. As the clan's territory expanded, seasonal migratory camps required portable teaching solutions. Elders pioneered the use of pocket palisades, bundles of bamboo-like reeds carved with pictorial sequences tied at one end so they rolled open like scrolls. Each reed contained a narrow panel, animal tracks, edible root profiles, star charts for navigation. Unfurling the bundle revealed a continuous tapestry of illustrations, which apprentices read in sequence as they moved camp. These lightweight palisades were the Stone Age equivalent of field guides, indispensable for nomadic survival. In captivity by rival tribes, knowledge-bearing became an act of defiance. Captured members swallowed small bone talismans to prevent enemies from seizing secrets, a risky gambit that sometimes required mid-capture retrieval through emergency jaw incisions. More typically, they memorized entire chants and spewed them back in the dark of night, disrupting enemy sleep with eerie whispered verses of constellations and honey-roasting recipes. Such psychological warfare underscored how deeply knowledge had become intertwined with identity and community cohesion. By the time adolescence yielded to adult responsibilities, each clan member carried a composite of learning. muscle memory for spear thrusts, tattoos chronicling key lessons, bones recording specialized lore, songs and chants echoing through every waking moment. Their minds were living libraries, their bodies walking archives. When writing finally emerged millennia later, these practices, oral recitation, visual symbolism, tactile mnemonics, served as the scaffolding upon which scripts and alphabets were built. Part 2 of our Odyssey ends here, with flesh inked in memory, caves transformed into encyclopedias, and bones elevated to the status of scroll. Next up, the chaotic dawn of proto-writing, chip tokens, knot cords, and sand calendars, and the eventual clash between oral traditions and the first scribes. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll watch the very first letters stumble into being, and witness how the written word both liberated and ensnared human knowledge. The dawn of proto-writing began not with a grand revelation, but with the quiet clatter of carved tokens tumbling from a leather pouch onto the dirt floor of a wind-blasted hut. These weren't toys or trinkets, they were the first inklings of a system desperate to cheat mortality. For thousands of years, cavemen had been locked in a brutal cycle. Learn, teach, forget, repeat. And when elders perished, vast vaults of knowledge went with them. So they began, tentatively, to etch meaning into objects. Picture it, a chunk of bone, smoothed by countless fingers, marked with a crude etching of a goat. This token meant one goat, or perhaps a place where goats had last been seen, or a warning that goats had been possessed by demons. Context was everything, and therein lay the chaos. One clan's goat token might be another's symbol for bad stew. The only way to understand the token was to also have the oral tradition, and therein lay the paradox. They were trying to make memory permanent, but the meaning still relied on fragile human recall. Tokens were the cavemen's sticky notes, scattered and ambiguous. Naturally, the system escalated. Soon they developed token bundles, strings of tokens tied together with sinew or gut, worn like grotesque necklaces of semi-literate intention. A hunter might carry a bundle of 7, a spear-shaped token for hunt, an antler for deer, a droplet for rainy season, a fire symbol for campfire stories, and 3 more so abstract even their maker probably forgot what they meant. Interpreting these bundles became an art form, and often a source of heated debate. Misreading a bundle could lead to catastrophe. One infamous case involved a token string that was supposed to convey "go east in spring to hunt deer." A young apprentice misread it as "go east in spring to hunt spirits." He disappeared into the woods and returned weeks later, gaunt and paranoid, clutching a rabbit carcass and insisting it had spoken to him. Enter the knot cords. Known today by names like quipu, this innovation arose from the chaos of token misinterpretation. Knots were less ambiguous, at least in theory. A thick cord that represented a category, food, shelter, enemy activity, and smaller cords hung from it, each tied with a specific knot. 3 overhand knots might mean 3 days' journey. A double twist could signify danger. The true brilliance lay in texture. You didn't even have to see the knots. You could feel them in the dark. Knowledge you could hold, even in blindness. Naturally, rival clans began to sabotage knot cords by stealthily retying them in the night. False messages proliferated, and a clan that thought they were hunting caribou might end up in the swampy domain of giant lizards. The knot wars, as later generations would call them, were less about battle and more about miscommunication, and everyone lost. Then came the sand calendars, an early attempt at temporal writing. Elders noticed patterns in the stars, in the waxing and waning of the moon, in the migration of animals. But to mark these cycles physically, they turned to sand and sticks. In ritual spaces cleared of debris, they traced diagrams into soft earth, spirals for months, lines for days, dots for important events like the time of stinging bees, or when the river eats children. Each dawn, the diagrams were redrawn, eud sudsum, laborious task, but it allowed for scheduling of events and offerings. Naturally, rains destroyed these diagrams regularly, leading to furious debates over whether the mist sacrifices caused floods or whether the floods erased the sacrifices. Time, it seemed, was a fickle collaborator. These early systems bred a new class of semi-specialist, the proto-scribe. Neither shaman nor warrior, the proto-scribe was the clan's memory mule. Armed with pouch, cord, and stick, they attended every gathering, grunted their way through story recitations, and marked every significant event with a flurry of knots, tokens, and sand squiggles. Their role was vital and resented. Warriors mocked them as string humpers. Shamans accused them of trapping the spirits in the knots. And yet, every clan kept at least one proto-scribe, if only to have someone else to blame when a raid failed, because the knots were tied wrong. As these tools evolved, visual symbols grew in complexity. Bone shards were replaced by flat clay tablets, which retained impressions better. A goat hoof pressed into soft clay became shorthand for livestock. A handprint with 4 fingers splayed meant family group of 4. And so began the slippery slope toward written symbols, but they didn't yet have a language, just a chaotic stew of images, impressions, and localized meaning. Symbols varied wildly from one clan to another. The sun could be a dot, a circle, or a circle with angry lines. One clan's rain symbol, 3 vertical slashes, was another's glyph for weeping spirits. Misreading led to offense. There were skirmishes over whether a clay tablet offering meant "we come in peace" or "we'll roast your shaman." The diplomatic stakes of symbols had never been higher. To resolve this, clans attempted standardization. The first international summit of its kind, known as the Gathering of the 5 Tribes, hosted in a neutral valley with suspiciously abundant berries, some suspect early efforts at hospitality sabotage. Tribal leaders, proto-scribes, and shamans convened. They laid out clay tablets, knot cords, and tokens side by side, debating for days. The arguments were legendary. One scribe insisted his goat symbol, an upside-down V, was universal, while another countered that it looked like a mountain and thus meant "go that way." Fistfights broke out over the meaning of a spiral. One elder declared spirals heretical and was pelted with berry mush. Eventually, a compromise emerged, multi-symbol sequences. Instead of relying on a single glyph for goat, they'd combine animal plus horn plus bleats annoyingly. This early syntax reduced ambiguity and opened the door to longer messages. Suddenly, the concept of grammar lurked on the horizon, a terrifying and exhilarating notion. With longer messages came the need for permanence. The sand was too fragile. Tokens got lost. Knots wore out. Clay, however, could be fired in pits to create hardened tablets. Thus began the Great Kiln Age. Every major event, birth, death, new hunting grounds, astronomical anomalies, was etched onto clay and baked. Storage pits were dug. Elders muttered anxiously about too much information, while proto-scribes grinned maniacally, clay-stained and sleep-deprived, inventing symbols for everything from "the wind smells wrong" to "do not eat the red fish." This explosion of symbolism created another problem. Who could access it? Some shamans argued that writing stole power from oral tradition and weakened the gods. They claimed that writing down a chant made it lose its magic. To prove their point, they inscribed a prayer onto a tablet and buried it under a dung heap. When the following hunt failed, they declared the writing cursed. Scribes naturally disagreed. They began guarding their symbols, developing coded shorthand, twisting common glyphs into esoteric scripts. Knowledge became elitist, a commodity hoarded by the literate few. Meanwhile, common folk complained that scribes spent too much time with clay and not enough in the real world. A protest movement emerged, Smash the Tablet, where angry hunters would destroy tablets they deemed excessive or irrelevant. The most famous instance involved a 12-tablet epic chronicling the digestive habits of woolly rhinos. When the scribe who authored it refused to return to hunting duties, his tablets were smashed in a public ceremony known as Clay Reckoning. Despite the backlash, the scribe class persisted. They diversified, creating portable writing kits, small satchels containing clay, water flasks, styluses made of bone, and reference tokens. Itinerant scribes traveled between clans, offering transcription services in exchange for food or shelter. They spread knowledge, but also controversy. When 2 clans interpreted the same tablet differently, bloodshed often followed. He wrote "Celebrate Harvest," one would claim. No, he wrote "Prepare for War," the other insisted. The ambiguity of early symbols led to constant bickering and scribe banishments. Still, the momentum of writing was unstoppable. As humans yearned to preserve their world in lasting form, their symbols multiplied, their chords grew intricate, and their clay hardened into history. Part 3 ends here, on the cusp of true literacy, where the written word emerges from the ash of ambiguity, and cavemen teeter on the edge of becoming authors, willing or not. Stay tuned for Part 4, where alphabets rise, memory becomes optional, and knowledge finally escapes the fragile prison of human flesh. It began innocently enough. Someone, somewhere, got tired of drawing the same goat 1,000 times. The same spirals, the same dots, the same horn plus bleat plus smell combo, just to remind people not to pet the angry goats near the cliff. So, in a moment of madness or genius, a scribe decided, what if we used symbols that stood for sounds, not things? Sounds, not objects, not actions, but the noises people made with their mouths when yelling at each other about bad meat or whose turn it was to clean the bone pile. The first attempts at phonetic symbols were rough. Imagine a circle meaning oo, a triangle meaning ka, and a squiggle meaning esh. Now imagine trying to string those together into something vaguely resembling look out for falling rocks. Instead, early readers interpreted the symbols as goat, moon cave, shrugged, and got flattened by falling rocks. There were casualties, but the idea took hold. It was faster, more flexible, and best of all, incomprehensible to everyone who wasn't trained. That meant power. The scribes leaned into this, creating the first letters, not quite the alphabets we know, but close. And with those letters, they wrote everything. Contracts for sharing firewood, treaties that never lasted, curses, extremely popular, and declarations of love, confusing and grammatically disastrous. Now, knowledge didn't just live in memory or flesh or bone. It lived in tablets, in stone walls, in wood planks painted with strange symbols that most people couldn't understand. The elders, who once ruled by memory, saw their power slipping. Knowledge was no longer a whispered story by firelight. It was a cold tablet hanging on the cave wall, judging them. Suddenly, the ability to read became everything. The reader's caste emerged, smug, cloaked, and entirely too dramatic. They would stroll into gatherings, glance at a tablet, and proclaim things like, "This says your taxes due." No one knew what taxes were, but it sounded serious. The readers soon gained influence, trading interpretations for food, shelter, or personal goat servants. In response, non-literate clans invented fake reading, a competitive sport where people loudly pretended to interpret symbols, usually in exaggerated tones. One famous performance involved a man reading a soup recipe as a declaration of war. The ensuing battle over misread seasoning proportions is still legendary. Meanwhile, the writing systems themselves fractured. One region used 22 letters, another used 47, plus 12 seasonal modifiers. Some added vibe glyphs, symbols meant to convey the emotional tone of a sentence. For example, at the end of a sentence meant angry tone or literally on fire, depending on context. Chaos, once again, reigned supreme. Still, as with all human endeavors, standardization eventually loomed. A group of scribes, tired of hauling 50-letter alphabets carved into stone, proposed a unified writing system. Fewer symbols, universal pronunciation, and no vibe glyphs. They called it the alphabet, from alpha, meaning first, and bet, meaning you bet this'll catch on. Early alphabets were crude but functional. For the first time, a single system could represent every sound in a language. The efficiency was intoxicating and terrifying. Oral tradition screamed. The bards, the storytellers, the memory keepers, they saw doom on the horizon. With written words came lazy memory. Why memorize a 300-verse epic about mammoth hunting when you could just read it off a wall? Why sing the story of the fire spirit when someone had already scratched it onto bark with footnotes? Protests erupted. Storytellers declared books are for cowards, and staged sit-ins around the campfires chanting rhymes and banging sticks in rhythm. Some even burned written tablets, calling them soul cages. Meanwhile, literate folks rolled their eyes and built libraries, stone rooms filled with tablets, scrolls, and an oppressive silence that whispered, "Don't touch unless you can read." The library wars weren't official wars per se, but they were brutal. On one side, the oralists, defending memory, performance, and the sacred ritual of forgetting half the story and making up the rest. On the other, the literates promoting precision, archiving, and the cold joy of correcting someone mid-sentence with, "Actually, the tablet says." In the end, no one won. Both sides lost ground to a third force: children. As always, kids didn't care about the politics. They just wanted to learn everything fast. And the alphabet was fast. They scrawled letters on walls, on rocks, on the dirt. They invented games with letters, rhymed nonsense, and developed the first knock-knock jokes, originating from Thump Thump Cave who. Writing at last was democratized. Soon everyone was writing recipes, love notes, insults, instructions like "do not poke the bear," lists of clan rules, songs about how not to die in winter, birth records, death records, warnings like "this cave cursed, go away," which, funnily enough, attracted more people than it scared off. The written word exploded. With alphabets came stories beyond memory, laws that couldn't be argued, and knowledge that outlived its creator. And with that, cavemen stumbled, bloodied, ink-stained, and slightly smug, into history. So next time you pick up a pen or tap away at your phone, remember, it started with a goat drawing and ended with the painful, chaotic birth of literacy. A birth full of knot cords, tattoo duels, fake readers, and the eternal struggle between remembering and forgetting. Thanks for sticking around through this sarcastic, agonizing, and occasionally goat-filled descent into the nightmare that was early knowledge. Drop a comment below, maybe in your own made-up alphabet, and let me know if you've ever misread something so badly it started a small war. Until next time, keep your symbols simple and your goats far from cliffs.